The bruises were easy to hide, until the day her boss noticed. Iris Vale thought she could keep her secret buried beneath foundation and long sleeves, working silently in the shadows of Adrian Corvino's empire. But when the most dangerous man in the city asked her a single, quiet question, everything changed. What happens when a woman running from violence catches the attention of a man who controls it? This is a story about power, protection, and the thin line between fear and trust. If you're watching, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches. Now, let's begin. The air conditioning in Adrian Corvino's executive suite hummed with mechanical precision, but it did nothing to cool the suffocating heat that pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Summer in the concrete jungle was merciless, and on the 42nd floor of Corvino Enterprises, Iris Vale felt every degree of it despite the climate control that kept the temperature at a steady 68. She sat at her desk in the reception area outside Adrian's private office, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. 6 months. She'd been his secretary for 6 months, and in that time she had perfected the art of invisibility. In a world where Adrian Corvino's attention could mean either fortune or ruin, being overlooked was a survival skill. Iris had learned quickly that her job wasn't just about scheduling meetings or managing correspondence. It was about reading the temperature of a room before entering it, knowing when to speak and when silence was safer, understanding that the man behind the mahogany door wielded power that extended far beyond quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. Everyone knew what Adrian Corvino was. The legitimate business, real estate development, construction contracts, import-export operations, was merely the surface. Beneath it ran currents of influence that touched everything from city council decisions to union negotiations to problems that disappeared as cleanly as morning fog. People didn't ask questions. They simply understood that Adrian Corvino was not a man to cross. And Iris Vale had no intention of crossing him. She needed this job too desperately. The salary was more than she'd ever earned in her life, enough to cover her mother's medication, the rent on their modest apartment in Queens, and the endless stream of bills that seemed to multiply no matter how hard she worked. Before Corvino Enterprises, she'd juggled 3 part-time jobs and still fallen short every month. This position had been a miracle she couldn't afford to lose, so she made herself small, efficient, forgettable. This morning, though, forgettable was harder to achieve. Iris adjusted the collar of her blouse for the 3rd time in as many minutes, making sure it covered the bruise that spread like a dark flower across her collarbone. The long sleeves hid the fingerprints on her upper arms, 5 distinct marks where he'd grabbed her 2 nights ago. The makeup covering the split in her lower lip was professional grade, the kind stage actors used, but she still worried it wasn't enough. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, and she forced them to steady. Control. She needed control. The phone on her desk rang, the internal line. "Yes, Mr. Corvino?" "Coffee," came the response. His voice was always low, measured. Adrian Corvino never raised his voice, which somehow made him more intimidating than men who shouted. "And bring the Henderson contracts." "Right away." Iris stood, smoothing her skirt, checking her reflection in the darkened computer screen. The face that looked back at her was carefully composed. Pale foundation, neutral lipstick applied precisely to hide the swelling, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional. Untouchable. She gathered the contracts from the filing system, then moved to the small kitchen area adjacent to her desk. The coffee was already fresh. She'd made it when she arrived at 7, knowing Adrian would want it the moment he came in. He took it black, no sugar, in the specific cup he preferred. Her reflection caught her eye in the glass of the cabinet as she reached for the cup, and for just a moment the mask slipped. She looked tired. Older than her 26 years, there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of pain carefully controlled. Iris took a breath and rebuilt the wall. Then she carried the coffee and contracts to Adrian's door, knocked twice, and entered. Adrian Corvino's office was a study in controlled power. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with law books and first editions that Iris suspected he'd actually read. The desk was massive, clear of clutter except for a single laptop and a phone. Everything else was filed, organized, invisible. Like the man himself, the office revealed nothing unnecessary. Adrian sat behind his desk, reviewing something on his laptop screen. He was 38, though he carried himself with the gravity of someone older. Dark hair cut precisely, a face that was handsome in a severe way, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He wore suits that probably cost more than Iris made in a month, always perfectly tailored, always immaculate. "The Henderson contracts," Iris said, placing them on his desk along with the coffee. "And the coffee you requested." "Thank you." She turned to leave, relief already flooding through her. Another interaction completed without incident. Another day of invisibility maintained. "Iris." She froze. He rarely used her first name. In 6 months, she could count on one hand the number of times she'd heard it from his lips. "Yes, Mr. Corvino?" "Look at me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Slowly she turned. Adrian had risen from his chair and was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. His gaze moved across her face with the same precision he applied to everything else. Systematic, thorough, missing nothing. "Come here." It wasn't a request. Iris crossed the space between them, stopping a careful distance from his desk. Professional distance, safe distance. "Closer." She stepped forward, her pulse thundering in her ears. Adrian studied her face for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he asked, "What happened?" I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Corvino. Your lip is swollen, you're wearing more makeup than usual, and you've adjusted your collar 4 times since you walked in." His voice remained calm, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. "What happened?" Iris felt the careful walls she'd built start to crack. "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're not fine." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower. "Did someone hurt you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she didn't want to examine. For 6 months she'd been invisible, and now Adrian Corvino was looking directly at her, seeing things she'd desperately tried to hide. "It's personal," she managed. "It won't affect my work." "That's not what I asked." She met his gaze and saw something unexpected there. Not pity. Adrian Corvino didn't do pity. But there was a sharpness, a focus that suggested this wasn't idle curiosity. He actually wanted to know. More than that, he seemed to care about the answer. The wall cracked further. "My mother," Iris heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them, pulled out by the weight of his attention. "She's been seeing someone. She stopped, swallowed. "He has a temper." "And these bruises?" Adrian gestured to her face, though his hand never came close to touching her. "He gave you those?" "He was hurting her. I got in the way." The admission felt like defeat. "It's handled. It won't happen again." "How do you know it won't happen again?" "Because I made sure of it." Iris lifted her chin slightly, trying to reclaim some dignity. "I handle my own problems, Mr. Corvino." For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. He simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he walked around his desk, moving with the controlled grace that characterized everything he did, and stopped a few feet away from her. "I could handle it for you," he said quietly. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was crystal clear. Adrian Corvino could make problems disappear, everyone knew that. One word from him, and the man who'd put his hands on her and her mother would vanish like smoke. Iris felt a complicated knot of emotions tighten in her chest. Gratitude, certainly. The offer was more than anyone else had ever extended. But also fear. The kind of help Adrian Corvino offered came with a price, even if that price wasn't immediately visible. And more than that, she understood what handle it meant in his world. Violence answered with violence, blood for blood. "No," she said firmly. "Thank you, but no. I don't want—" She chose her words carefully. "I don't want that kind of help." Something flickered in Adrian's expression. Respect, maybe, or surprise. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded slowly, then returned to his desk. But before he sat down, he looked at her one more time. "If you change your mind, the offer stands, indefinitely." "I won't change my mind." "Even so." He picked up the Henderson contracts, dismissing her with the gesture. "That will be all." Iris left his office on shaking legs, closing the door carefully behind her. Her heart was still racing, her hands still trembling. She returned to her desk and sat down, trying to process what had just happened. Adrian Corvino had noticed her. After 6 months of perfect invisibility, he'd looked at her and seen past every carefully constructed defense. Worse, he'd offered help, the kind of help that men like him specialized in, and she'd refused. Iris buried herself in work for the rest of the morning, fielding calls and managing Adrian's schedule with mechanical efficiency. But she couldn't shake the memory of his voice, low and certain. "I could handle it for you." Part of her wished she'd said yes, so... The rest of the week passed in careful normalcy. Adrian didn't mention their conversation again, and Iris worked hard to reestablish the professional distance that had served her so well. She arrived early, stayed late, and executed her duties flawlessly. Invisible again, safe again. But something had shifted. She noticed it in small ways. The way Adrian's gaze would linger on her face for just a moment too long, as if checking for new bruises. The way he'd pause before giving her assignments that might require her to work late. The way his voice, always measured, seemed to carry an extra note of something when he spoke to her directly. Concern, maybe. Or awareness. It made her nervous in ways she couldn't articulate. Friday afternoon, as Iris was preparing to leave, a man she'd never seen before appeared in the reception area. He was large, built like someone who'd spent years in a gym, with a face that had seen its share of fights. He wore a dark suit that didn't quite disguise the bulk beneath it. "Miss Vale?" he asked. Iris stood, immediately wary. "Yes?" "My name is Marco. Mr. Corvino asked me to escort you home." "That's not necessary." Nevertheless, Marco's expression was neutral but immovable. "Mr. Corvino insists." Before Iris could argue, Adrian's door opened. He stood in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled up in a rare concession to the heat. "Marco will make sure you get home safely," he said. "Consider it a condition of employment." "Mr. Corvino." "Non-negotiable, Iris." There was that voice again, calm, measured, absolute. The voice that didn't argue because it didn't need to. The voice of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed. Iris looked between Adrian and Marco, understanding with sudden clarity that this wasn't about her preferences. Adrian had decided she needed protection, and so protection she would have, whether she wanted it or not. "Fine," she said quietly. Marco drove her home in a black sedan that probably cost more than her annual salary. He didn't try to make conversation, for which Iris was grateful. He simply drove with professional competence, his eyes constantly scanning the streets and mirrors. When they reached her apartment building in Queens, Marco got out and surveyed the area with the same systematic attention Adrian brought to everything. Then he opened her door. "I'll be nearby," he said. "You won't see me, but I'll be watching." Is that supposed to be comforting? The corner of Marco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "It's supposed to be effective, Miss Vale. Have a good evening." He drove away, leaving Iris standing on the sidewalk feeling off balance and uncertain. She looked around trying to spot where Marco might position himself, but saw nothing. The street looked exactly as it always did. Modest buildings, parked cars, a few people walking dogs or heading home from work. But now she knew someone was watching. Someone Adrian Corvino had assigned to watch. Iris went upstairs to the apartment she shared with her mother, her mind churning with complicated thoughts. The place was small, just 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, a living room barely large enough for a couch and television. But it was clean, and the rent was manageable, and it was theirs. Her mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Iris's heart clenched at the sight of her. Margaret Vale was 53 but looked older, worn down by years of struggle and bad choices. The latest bad choice, a man named Derek, who worked construction and drank too much, had thankfully disappeared from their lives after the incident 2 nights ago. Iris had made absolutely sure of that. "How was work, honey?" her mother asked. "Fine. Same as always." "You look tired." "Long week." Iris set down her bag and went to help with dinner, grateful for the mundane normalcy of chopping vegetables and discussing Margaret's day. Her mother worked as a home health aide, visiting elderly clients who needed help with daily tasks. It was hard work that paid poorly, but Margaret approached it with the same gentle care she'd always given to everything, except her own life. When it came to her own life, Margaret Vale had consistently chosen men who hurt her, lost jobs she needed, and made decisions that left her struggling. Iris had learned early that she would need to be the stable one, the responsible one, The one who made sure the bills got paid and the world kept turning. It was exhausting. After dinner, Iris stood at the window of her bedroom, looking down at the street below. She couldn't see Marco, but she knew he was there somewhere, watching, protecting, on Adrian Corvino's orders. The thought sent a complicated shiver through her. She didn't want to need protection. She didn't want to be noticed. But some small, traitorous part of her felt safer knowing that someone was watching, that someone with real power had decided she was worth protecting, that Adrian Corvino had looked at her bruises and cared enough to do something about them. Don't, she told herself firmly, don't start thinking like that. Men like Adrian Corvino didn't care about women like her except as employees or assets. Whatever kindness he was showing was probably some twisted form of noblesse oblige, the powerful taking care of the weak because it suited them. Nothing more. But her treacherous heart whispered something different. Saturday morning, Iris woke to find flowers on the building's front step, a small, elegant arrangement of white roses with no card. She brought them upstairs, confused, and set them on the kitchen table. "Those are beautiful," her mother said. "Did you order them?" "No." But Iris knew who'd sent them. Only one person made sense. The roses sat on the table all weekend, perfect and unsettling, a reminder that Adrian Corvino was thinking about her even outside office hours. On Monday, she arrived at work determined to thank him and establish boundaries. But he was in meetings all morning and left for a business lunch before she could speak to him. The flowers kept coming. Always white roses, always with no card, always placed where she'd find them, on her desk, at her apartment door, once even at her mother's workplace, which terrified Iris because it meant Adrian knew more about her life than she'd ever told him. "You have to stop," she finally said on Wednesday, standing in his office after everyone else had gone home. The flowers, the guard, all of it. Adrian looked up from his laptop. "Why?" "Because it's inappropriate. I'm your employee. Marco ensures your safety. The flowers are a gesture of concern. Neither has anything to do with your employment. It feels like," she struggled for words, "like you're crossing lines." "What lines?" Adrian's voice remained calm, but his eyes were sharp. "I haven't asked you for anything. I haven't propositioned you. I haven't made any demands. I've simply ensured your safety and occasionally sent flowers. If that makes you uncomfortable, I'll stop. But understand that my concern is genuine, Iris. What happened to you, what that man did, shouldn't happen to anyone." The words were so simple, so straightforward, and they hit harder than anything else he could have said. Iris felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away furiously. "I don't need saving," she said quietly. "I know, but that doesn't mean you should have to face everything alone." Adrian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. "I'm not trying to control you or manipulate you. I'm simply offering what help I can, in the way I can offer it. If you truly want me to stop, I will. But don't refuse help just because you think you're supposed to handle everything by yourself." Iris stood there, caught between pride and pragmatism, between fear and something else she didn't want to name. Finally, she said, "No more flowers at my mother's work. It scares her." Adrian nodded. "Agreed. And Marco needs to be less obvious. The neighbors are starting to talk." "I'll speak to him." "And," she hesitated, "thank you for the flowers. They're beautiful." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're welcome." Iris left his office feeling like she'd just navigated a minefield blindfolded. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd established boundaries, and Adrian had respected them. That had to mean something. The weeks blurred together. Summer deepened into late August, the heat pressing down on the city like a physical weight. Iris settled into a strange new normal, work during the day, Marco's invisible protection at night, and occasional flowers that appeared without fanfare or expectation. She tried not to think about what it meant that Adrian Corvino was still thinking about her. Tried not to notice the way her heart beat faster when he said her name, or the way his rare smiles seemed to linger in her mind long after they'd faded from his face. Then, in early September, Iris caught a cold that rapidly developed into something worse. She'd been pushing herself too hard, long hours at work, evenings spent caring for her mother, weekends filled with errands and chores. Her immune system finally gave up the fight. On Tuesday morning, she woke with a fever and a cough that felt like her lungs were trying to escape through her throat. She called in sick for the first time since starting at Corvino Enterprises, her voice barely a rasp. "Stay home," Adrian said when she explained. "Rest. I'll manage." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for being ill. Take care of yourself." Iris spent the day in bed, drifting in and out of feverish sleep. Her mother checked on her between clients, bringing tea and concern. By evening, the fever had spiked higher, and Margaret was talking about urgent care. The doorbell rang at 7. Margaret answered it and came back looking confused. "There's a man here with medicine and food. He says Mr. Corvino sent him." Iris struggled upright, her head pounding. Marco appeared in her bedroom doorway carrying a pharmacy bag and containers of what smelled like chicken soup. "Mr. Corvino heard you were ill," he said simply. "He sent medicine and food. The soup is from his family's restaurant, his grandmother's recipe. He says it cures everything." He didn't have to. He insisted. Marco set everything on her dresser. "There's a note." After Marco left, Iris opened the note with shaking hands. Adrian's handwriting was precise, controlled, like everything else about him. "Rest. Recover. Don't worry about work. The soup is mandatory. My grandmother will somehow know if you don't eat it, and I'll never hear the end of it." Despite her fever, despite her exhaustion, Iris found herself smiling. The note was so unexpectedly human, so different from the controlled facade Adrian maintained at work. She could almost hear his voice in the words, dry and slightly amused. Her mother brought her a bowl of the soup, and it was incredible, rich and flavorful, filled with vegetables and tender chicken. As Iris ate, she thought about Adrian Corvino calling his family's restaurant, explaining that his secretary was sick, asking for his grandmother's special soup. The image didn't fit with the cold, calculating businessman everyone knew. But then, nothing about Adrian's behavior toward her fit that image anymore. She fell asleep thinking about white roses and soup, and a man who wielded terrible power but chose, inexplicably, to use it to send her flowers and medicine. By Friday, Iris was well enough to return to work, though still tired and pale. She arrived to find her desk exactly as she'd left it. No pile of urgent tasks, no crisis to manage. Adrian had clearly handled everything in her absence. When she brought him his morning coffee, he looked up with something like relief. "You're back." "I'm back. Thank you for the soup. And the medicine. It was very kind." "You're welcome. How are you feeling?" "Better." "Still tired, but better." Adrian studied her with that penetrating gaze. "If you need to leave early, do so. Don't push yourself." "I'll be fine." "Iris." He said her name quietly, and she met his eyes. "I mean it. Take care of yourself. The work will wait." She nodded, throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. "Thank you." The next few weeks revealed a pattern. Adrian had always been demanding but fair as an employer. Now, though, he showed a consideration that went beyond professional courtesy. He made sure she took lunch breaks. He sent her home at reasonable hours. When she mentioned her mother needed help moving furniture, he sent Marco and 2 other men to assist, waving away her protests. "It's nothing," he said when she tried to thank him. Marco needed something to do anyway. But it wasn't nothing. Every gesture, every kindness, every moment of unexpected consideration, they added up to something Iris didn't know how to quantify. Adrian Corvino was showing her a version of himself that contradicted everything she'd believed about him. The feared Mafia boss was being gentle. The man known for ruthlessness was showing restraint. And Iris, despite every warning her brain screamed at her, was starting to trust him. Autumn came to the city in a rush of cool air and falling leaves. The heat finally broke, replaced by crisp mornings and evenings that required jackets. Iris's bruises had long since faded, and the memory of that terrible night felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Derek hadn't returned. Her mother seemed lighter, happier, freed from the weight of a toxic relationship. And Iris was starting to understand that the distance between boss and secretary, between Adrian Corvino and Iris Vale, had narrowed to almost nothing. She caught herself watching him during meetings, noticing the way he listened with complete focus, the way his rare smiles transformed his severe features into something almost beautiful. She found herself looking forward to their morning interactions, to the brief moments when his attention was entirely on her. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. But knowing didn't stop her heart from beating faster when he said her name, or her breath from catching when his hand accidentally brushed hers while reaching for a file. One October afternoon, as golden light slanted through the office windows, Adrian called her into his office. But instead of work, he simply said, "Sit." Iris sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, confused. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've been with me for almost a year now." 10 months, Iris agreed. "In that time, you've been exemplary, efficient, discreet, reliable. You handle everything I ask with grace and competence." He paused. "But I realize I know almost nothing about you beyond your work. Is that a problem? Perhaps, or perhaps it's an opportunity." Adrian's gaze was steady, intense. "Tell me about yourself, Iris. Not my secretary, you. What do you like? What makes you happy?" The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know what you mean." "Simple things? Do you like music? Art? What do you do when you're not here?" Iris fumbled for an answer, realizing with sudden clarity that she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her about herself. Not her work, not her mother, but her. "I used to paint," she said slowly. "Watercolors, mostly. I haven't in years, but I used to enjoy it." "Why did you stop?" "No time. And supplies are expensive." "What else?" "I like reading. Old novels, mostly. Austen, Bronte, that kind of thing." She felt self-conscious admitting it. "It's escapist, I know, but it's not escapist. It's human. Everyone needs beauty in their life." Adrian's voice was gentle. "What's your favorite? Of the novels?" "Jane Eyre, probably. I know it's predictable, but there's something about it. About someone invisible becoming seen. About finding value in unexpected places." She stopped, feeling like she'd revealed too much, but Adrian just nodded. "Not predictable. Appropriate. We all want to be seen, Iris, truly seen, not just noticed." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Iris felt her carefully constructed walls crack a little wider. "Why are you asking me this?" she said quietly. "Because I've spent almost a year ensuring your safety and sending you flowers, and I've never asked what you actually want. What you need beyond protection." Adrian leaned forward, his gaze holding hers. "So I'm asking now. What do you need, Iris?" The question was too large, too honest. Iris looked away, her heart racing. "I don't know how to answer that." "Then think about it. And when you're ready, tell me." She left his office feeling unmoored, like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Adrian Corvino wanted to know her, not as an employee, not as a project, but as a person. The realization was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. That weekend, a package arrived at her apartment. Inside was a set of professional-grade watercolor supplies and a note in Adrian's precise handwriting. "Everyone needs beauty in their life. Paint something." Iris stood in her small bedroom holding the expensive brushes and paints and felt something crack open in her chest. It would have been easier if Adrian had been cruel or demanding, if he'd fit the mold of a dangerous man using his power to control her. But instead, he was patient, kind, restrained in ways that spoke of tremendous self-control. He was showing her that power didn't have to corrupt, that strength could be gentle, that a man capable of terrible things could choose, day after day, not to do them. And Iris, who'd spent her whole life protecting herself from men who hurt the women they claimed to love, found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Adrian Corvino was different. The thought terrified her more than anything else, because if she was wrong, if she let her guard down and he turned into every other man who disappointed her, it would break something in her that she didn't know how to repair. But if she was right, then everything she'd believed about power and safety and love might need to be rewritten. Iris set up the watercolors on her small desk and, for the first time in years, began to paint. The watercolors changed something fundamental in Iris. Not all at once. Nothing with Adrian ever happened all at once. But gradually, like watching dawn break over the city skyline. Each evening after work, she'd sit at her small desk and paint. Simple things at first. The view from her window, a vase of flowers, the curve of a teacup catching afternoon light. The act of creating something beautiful purely for herself felt revolutionary after years of survival mode. She didn't tell Adrian about the painting, but somehow he knew. He always knew. "You have paint on your hands," he observed one November morning as she set his coffee down. His voice carried that note of quiet satisfaction she was learning to recognize. Iris glanced at her fingers, finding a small smear of cerulean blue she'd missed washing off. "I've been practicing." "Good." Adrian's gaze lifted to meet hers, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm glad." See, it was such a small exchange, barely 30 seconds of conversation, but it stayed with Iris all day. The way he'd said good, like her happiness genuinely pleased him. The way he'd looked at her, not as an employer evaluating an employee's performance, but as someone who cared about her well-being. Marco's protection had become so routine that Iris barely noticed it anymore. He was a shadow, present but unobtrusive, and she'd come to appreciate the safety his presence provided. Her mother had stopped worrying about her walking home alone after dark. Iris had stopped checking over her shoulder every time she heard footsteps behind her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt secure. The feeling should have been purely practical, but Iris was self-aware enough to recognize that her sense of security was tied directly to Adrian. He'd created this bubble of protection around her, not because he wanted something in return, but simply because he decided she deserved to be safe. The realization that someone powerful thought she was worth protecting did something to her sense of self-worth that years of struggling alone never had. Late November brought the first real cold snap, temperatures dropping into the 30s overnight. Iris arrived at work on a Monday morning to find Adrian already in his office, unusual for him. Typically, he arrived precisely at 8:30, his schedule as regimented as everything else about him. "You're early," she said, bringing him coffee, even though she hadn't expected to need it ready yet. "Couldn't sleep." Adrian accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. He looked tired, she realized, shadows under his eyes that suggested a difficult night. "Do you have family plans for Thanksgiving?" The question caught her off guard. "Just my mother and me. We usually cook something simple, watch the parade. Nothing fancy." "No extended family?" "It's been just the two of us for a long time." Iris hesitated, then added, "My father left when I was 12. My mother's parents passed before I was born. We don't really have anyone else." Something flickered in Adrian's expression, recognition maybe, or understanding. That must have been difficult. "We managed." It was the truth, even if that management had often felt more like barely surviving. "What about you? Do you have Thanksgiving plans?" "Family dinner. My grandmother insists on cooking for an army even though there are only 7 of us." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She's been making the same meal for 40 years. Turkey, stuffing, 3 kinds of potatoes, enough vegetables to feed the entire neighborhood. And pie. So much pie." The image of Adrian Corvino, feared crime boss, ruthless businessman, sitting at a family table eating his grandmother's cooking was so incongruous that Iris almost laughed. But the fondness in his voice was unmistakable. "She sounds wonderful," Iris said. "She is. Terrifying, but wonderful." Adrian set down his coffee and looked at her directly. "Bring your mother. To dinner. My grandmother always makes too much food, and she'd love to meet you." Iris's heart stuttered. "I couldn't possibly. Why not?" "Because it's your family's Thanksgiving. We'd be intruding." "You'd be guests. There's a difference." Adrian's tone remained calm, but she could hear the subtle insistence underneath. "My grandmother has been asking about you ever since I told her about the soup." "You told your grandmother about me?" "I tell her about most things. She has opinions on everything, and she's usually right, which is irritating." That ghost of a smile appeared again. "She wants to meet the woman who's been making sure I actually eat lunch and remember to leave the office before midnight." "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing much more than your job, and we both know it." Adrian's gaze was steady, intense in the way that always made Iris feel seen down to her bones. "Come to dinner, Iris, please. It would make me happy." The please did it. Adrian Corvino didn't say please often, and when he did, it carried weight. More than that, the admission that her presence would make him happy cracked something open in her chest. "I'll ask my mother," she said quietly. "Good." Margaret Vale was predictably anxious about the invitation. "Are you sure this is appropriate? He's your boss, honey. Spending Thanksgiving with his family seems like crossing some kind of line." They were in the apartment's cramped kitchen, preparing dinner on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Iris chopped vegetables while her mother stirred soup on the stove. "He was very insistent," Iris said, "and his grandmother apparently wants to meet me." "Still, what if he expects something in return?" Iris paused mid-chop, the question hitting harder than her mother probably intended. What did Adrian expect? He'd been nothing but respectful, nothing but patient. But men like him didn't give without expecting something back, did they? Except he had. For months now, he'd given her safety, kindness, small gestures of care, and asked for nothing in return. Not once had he made her uncomfortable or pressured her for anything beyond what her job required. "I don't think he expects anything," Iris said slowly. "I think he's just being kind." "Men are never just kind, sweetheart. Not in my experience." And there it was, the lifetime of disappointment speaking through her mother's voice. Margaret had been hurt so many times by so many men that she'd lost the ability to believe in genuine kindness. Iris understood. She'd inherited that same skepticism, that same armor built from too many broken promises. But Adrian was systematically dismantling her defenses with his quiet patience, and she was starting to wonder if maybe her mother's experience didn't have to be her own. "He's different," Iris said. "That's what I always thought too, right up until they proved they weren't." The conversation ended there, but Margaret agreed to go. Iris suspected it was more about not wanting her daughter to attend alone than any real desire to meet Adrian's family, but she'd take what she could get. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of crisp November day that made the city feel almost magical. Marco picked them up at 10, driving them to a neighborhood in Brooklyn that surprised Iris with its tree-lined streets and well-maintained brownstones. "I thought he'd live in Manhattan," Margaret whispered as they pulled up to a particularly beautiful brownstone with a red door and window boxes that probably held flowers in warmer months. "This is his grandmother's house," Marco explained, coming around to open their door. "Family dinners are always here. Tradition." The door opened before they reached it, revealing an elderly woman who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, but radiated an authority that made her seem much larger. She had silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that transformed her stern features into something genuinely warm. "You must be Iris," she said, her voice carrying the faintest trace of an Italian accent. "And this is your mother. Welcome, welcome." "I'm Lucia, Adrian's grandmother. Come in before you freeze." The inside of the brownstone was warm and filled with the most incredible smells: roasting turkey, herbs, something sweet baking. Lucia ushered them into a living room where several people were already gathered, talking and laughing with the easy comfort of family. Adrian stood near the fireplace, talking to a man who looked enough like him to be a brother. When he saw Iris, his expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. Relief? Pleasure? Nervousness? "You came," he said, crossing to meet them. "We did. Thank you for inviting us." Iris gestured to her mother. "This is Margaret, my mother. Mom, this is Adrian Corvino." "Mrs. Vale, it's a pleasure to meet you." Adrian shook Margaret's hand with genuine courtesy. "Thank you for coming. Let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Adrian's family was smaller than Lucia's cooking suggested, but warm in a way Iris hadn't expected. There was his Uncle Vincent, a jovial man who owned the restaurant that had provided the soup months ago. Vincent's wife, Maria, who immediately pulled Margaret into conversation about home health care. Apparently, Maria's mother was one of Margaret's clients, though neither had made the connection before. The man who looked like Adrian was indeed his brother, Marcus, younger by 3 years and a lawyer. Marcus's wife, Elena, was an architect, and their 2 children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, were currently racing around the house despite their parents' attempts at control. And presiding over all of it was Lucia, who moved between kitchen and living room with the ease of someone who'd hosted thousands of family gatherings, making sure everyone had drinks and appetizers while the turkey finished roasting. "Your grandmother is formidable," Iris said to Adrian when they had a moment alone near the fireplace. "That's putting it mildly. She terrified me as a child. Still does, if I'm honest." Adrian's voice was low, meant only for her. "But she's the backbone of this family. After my father died, she kept us all together." "I didn't know your father had passed. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. I was 16. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. He was killed. Wrong place, wrong time, caught in something that wasn't his fight. My mother fell apart afterward. Lucia stepped in and raised Marcus and me while Mom found her footing again. The casual mention of his father being killed sent a chill through Iris. It explained so much about Adrian, the control, the need to protect, the way he'd built an empire on ensuring he was never powerless again. "Where is your mother now?" Iris asked gently. "Florida. She remarried a few years ago, someone good who makes her happy. They visit for Christmas." Adrian looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the echo of old pain carefully contained. "This life, what I do, what I've become, it's not for her. She deserves peace. And you don't?" "I'm not sure I've earned it yet." Before Iris could respond, Lucia called them all to dinner. The dining room table was laden with enough food for 20 people, every dish looking and smelling incredible. Lucia seated them with the practiced efficiency of a general positioning troupe. Iris found herself between Adrian and Elena, with her mother across the table between Vincent and Maria. The meal was a revelation. Not just the food, though that was extraordinary, but the easy warmth of conversation, the gentle teasing between siblings, the way Lucia quietly made sure everyone had enough, while also telling stories that made everyone laugh. It was the kind of family dinner Iris had seen in movies, but never experienced herself. Margaret seemed to relax as the evening progressed, drawn into conversation by Maria and Vincent, her usual wariness softening under their genuine interest. Iris watched her mother laugh at one of Vincent's jokes and felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Your mother seems happy," Adrian observed quietly. "She is. Thank you for this." "Thank me by having seconds. Lucia will be offended if there are leftovers." "There will definitely be leftovers. She cooked for an army." "And somehow, there's never enough pie. I've never understood it." Adrian served her more stuffing despite her protests. "Try the sweet potatoes. They're Maria's recipe. She refuses to give it to anyone, even Lucia." The evening stretched on, dinner giving way to dessert, 4 different pies, just as Adrian had warned, and then to coffee and conversation in the living room while the children played quietly with new toys Lucia had apparently been saving for after dinner. Iris found herself on the couch next to Elena, who was friendly and curious without being intrusive. "Adrian never brings anyone to family dinners," Elena said conversationally. "You're the first, actually." "Oh, I didn't realize." "Marcus and I have been together for 12 years, married for 8. In all that time, Adrian's never once brought a date or mentioned anyone special." Elena's smile was knowing. "So when he called Lucia and asked if he could bring his secretary and her mother to Thanksgiving, we all knew it meant something." Iris felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that. He's my boss. He was just being kind." "Adrian is a lot of things, but randomly kind to employees isn't one of them. He's fair, yes, respectful, absolutely, but inviting someone to family Thanksgiving? That's not kindness. That's interest." Across the room, Adrian was listening to something Vincent was explaining, his expression serious but engaged. As if sensing her attention, he glanced over and their eyes met. The small smile he gave her made her heart skip. "He's different with you," Elena continued. "Softer." Marcus noticed it too. We were starting to worry Adrian would turn into some kind of workaholic hermit, but then he started mentioning you. Not obvious things, just little comments here and there. Iris suggested I should take lunch. Iris reminded me about my doctor's appointment. Iris thinks I work too late. It was clear you'd gotten under his skin. "I'm just doing my job." "No, honey. You're doing much more than that, and I think you know it." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "The question is whether you're okay with it." Was she? Iris looked at Adrian again, at this man who held terrible power but used it to send her flowers, and protect her mother and invite them both to family dinners. Who could destroy people with a word but chose instead to be patient and kind and restrained? "I don't know," Iris admitted. "He scares me sometimes. Not because I think he'd hurt me, but because I'm starting to trust him, and I don't know if that's safe." Trust is never completely safe. That's what makes it trust. Elena squeezed her hand. "But for what it's worth, I've known Adrian for 8 years, and I've never seen him care about someone the way he cares about you. That kind of care is rare. Don't dismiss it just because you're scared." Later, as Marco drove them home through the quiet city streets, Margaret was uncharacteristically silent. Iris waited, knowing her mother well enough to recognize when she was processing something difficult. "They're good people," Margaret finally said as they neared their apartment. "His family, they're really good people." "They are. And Adrian, he looks at you like you're something precious." Her mother's voice was soft, almost wondering. "I've never seen a man look at a woman like that, like he'd do anything to keep her safe but wouldn't dream of trying to control her." "Mom, I know what I said before, about men never being just kind, but maybe—" Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe I was wrong, or maybe he's the exception. Either way, I think he cares about you, really cares, and I think you care about him too." Iris didn't deny it. She couldn't, not after spending an entire evening watching Adrian interact with his family, seeing the man behind the reputation, the one who helped his niece build a castle out of blocks, the one who listened to his uncle's stories with genuine interest, even though he'd probably heard them 100 times, the one who looked at his grandmother with such obvious love and respect. "I do care about him," Iris said quietly. "That's what scares me." "I know, baby. But maybe being scared isn't always a reason to run. Maybe sometimes it's a reason to be brave." That weekend, Iris painted. Not the careful, safe subjects she'd been practicing with, but something bolder, a portrait of Adrian based on memory. She captured the severe lines of his face, the intensity of his eyes, but also something softer in his expression. The version of him she was learning existed beneath the control. Monday morning, she arrived at work to find a small wrapped package on her desk. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook, expensive and beautiful, with thick cream-colored pages perfect for watercolors. The note was brief, "For when you need more space." Iris held the sketchbook and felt the last of her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Adrian wasn't pushing, he wasn't demanding. He was simply showing her day after day, gesture after gesture, that he saw her not as an employee or a project, but as someone worth cherishing. The morning progressed normally until just before lunch, when Adrian called her into his office. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his expression more serious than usual. Iris sat, immediately alert. That tone meant something important. "Marco reported that he saw Derek last night, near your apartment building." The name hit her like ice water. Derek, her mother's ex, the man who'd given Iris the bruises that started everything. He'd been gone for months, and she'd started to believe he was finally out of their lives. What was he doing there? Her voice came out calmer than she felt. "Watching. Just watching, according to Marco. He didn't approach or cause any trouble, but his presence concerns me." Adrian's jaw was tight. "I want to increase security around your apartment, and I think it's time we had a conversation about permanent solutions." "What kind of permanent solutions?" "The kind that ensures he never bothers you or your mother again." Adrian's voice was level, but Iris could hear the steel underneath. "I've been patient, Iris. I've respected your wishes and handled things legally when I could. But if he's back and watching your home, that changes things. You're talking about hurting him." It wasn't a question. "I'm talking about removing a threat. There's a difference." "Not to me." Iris stood, her hands shaking. "I told you from the beginning I didn't want that kind of help. I meant it. Even if it means you and your mother remain in danger." "We're not in danger. He was just looking. That's not illegal." "It's the prelude to something illegal." Adrian stood as well, moving around his desk but keeping distance between them. "Men like Derek don't just watch. They wait for an opportunity, and then they strike. I've seen it too many times to ignore the pattern. So what do you want me to do? Give you permission to make him disappear?" The words came out harsh, brittle, with fear and anger. "That's not who I am, Adrian, and I don't want it to be who you are. Not for me." Something flickered in Adrian's expression. Pain, maybe, or frustration. "What I want is to keep you safe. What I want is to not wake up in the middle of the night terrified that Marco's going to call and tell me something happened to you. What I want is for you to stop being so damn stubborn about accepting help. Help is one thing. Violence is another. And if violence is the only language men like Derek understand?" They stood on opposite sides of his office, the space between them feeling like a chasm. Iris could see the tension in Adrian's shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. He was holding himself back, exercising that tremendous control, but she could sense how much it cost him. "Promise me," she said quietly. "Promise me you won't hurt him. Promise me you'll find another way." "Iris, please, Adrian, I need to know that the man I'm starting to care about isn't someone who solves problems with violence. I need to know you're different." The admission hung between them, more vulnerable than anything else she'd said. She'd as good as told him she had feelings for him, had revealed the depth of her growing attachment. Adrian's expression shifted, the anger draining away to be replaced by something more complicated. "You're asking me to fight my nature, to go against everything I know about protecting the people I care about. I'm asking you to choose, to be the man you've shown me you can be, not the man everyone else expects." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Adrian said, "I'll find another way. I promise. But the security stays increased, and if he makes any kind of move, all bets are off." It wasn't everything Iris wanted, but it was more than she'd expected. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm not happy about this." "I know, but you're doing it anyway. That matters." Adrian moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, it's not just employer concern. It hasn't been for a long time. But I've been trying to respect boundaries, to not pressure you, to let you come to trust me in your own time." His voice dropped lower. "But watching you put yourself at risk, refusing protection because you're trying to prove you can handle everything alone, it's making me crazy, Iris." Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care about you more than I should, probably. More than is smart given our working relationship. But there it is." Adrian's eyes held hers, unflinching. "And I'm saying that if something happened to you, if I'd held back and kept my promises and you got hurt because of it, I'd never forgive myself." Iris couldn't breathe. The confession was everything she'd been hoping for and terrified of in equal measure. Adrian Corvino, powerful, controlled, dangerous Adrian Corvino, was telling her he cared, was admitting vulnerability, was showing her the man beneath the reputation. "I care about you too," she whispered. "That's why I need you to choose restraint. Not because I don't trust you, but because I do. I trust you to be better than the violence everyone expects." Adrian raised his hand slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and gently touched her face. His fingers were warm against her cheek, the touch so careful it made her want to cry. "I'll try," he said. "For you, I'll try. But you have to meet me halfway. You have to let me protect you, even if it's not the way I'd choose." "Okay." "Okay?" "Increase security, better locks. Whatever you think is necessary that doesn't involve hurting anyone." "It's a start." Adrian's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the gesture so tender it stole her breath. Then he stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. "We should get back to work." The moment broke, but its echoes remained. Iris returned to her desk feeling off balance and exhilarated and terrified. Adrian had essentially confessed his feelings, and she'd done the same, and now everything between them had shifted into uncertain territory. That evening, Marco drove her home to find a different car parked outside her building. Professional security, Adrian had explained, rotating shifts to ensure constant coverage. The new locks on her apartment door were industrial grade, and there were additional lights in the building's common areas that hadn't been there that morning. Adrian worked fast when he decided something needed doing. December arrived with early snow, the city transforming into a holiday postcard. Corvino Enterprises decorated their lobby with a massive tree and tasteful decorations. Iris caught herself humming Christmas carols while she worked, her mood lighter than it had been in years despite the lurking threat of Derek. Or maybe because of how Adrian had responded to that threat. He'd chosen her trust over his instincts, had promised to find solutions that didn't involve violence. It was such a small thing, and such an enormous thing all at once. The flowers kept coming, but now they felt different. Before they'd been gestures of concern. Now they felt like courtship, like Adrian's careful way of showing interest while maintaining the boundaries she needed. "You're smiling at roses," her mother observed one evening when Iris brought home the latest bouquet. "You've got it bad, honey." "Is that so wrong?" "No, it's terrifying and wonderful, which is what love usually is." Margaret helped arrange the flowers in a vase. Just promise me you'll be careful. I know he's been good to us, but men like him, they live in dangerous worlds. I know. And you care about him anyway. I do. Margaret hugged her daughter tightly. Then I hope he deserves you, because you deserve someone who'll cherish what a gift you are. The week before Christmas, Adrian asked Iris to stay late to help finalize some year-end contracts. The office was quiet, most people having left early for holiday parties. They worked in companionable silence, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. Done, Iris finally said, saving the last document. Everything's filed and ready for the new year. Good. Adrian leaned back in his chair, looking tired but satisfied. Thank you for staying late. I know you probably had plans. Just dinner with my mother. Nothing urgent. Iris hesitated, then asked, What about you? Any holiday plans? Family dinner on Christmas Eve, Lucia's tradition. Christmas Day is usually quiet, just me and whatever book I'm reading. The image of Adrian spending Christmas alone made her chest ache. That sounds lonely. It's peaceful. I don't mind it. But she could hear the lie in his voice, the way he tried to make solitude sound like a choice rather than a consequence. Adrian Corvino had built walls around himself as surely as she had, protecting himself from vulnerability by keeping everyone at arm's length. Everyone except her. Come to dinner, Iris heard herself say. On Christmas, my mother and I usually cook too much food and watch old movies. It's nothing fancy, but you'd be welcome. Adrian's expression shifted into something vulnerable. You don't have to. I want to, if you want to. I want to, he said quietly. More than you know. They sat in the quiet office, the city sparkling below them, and Iris felt the space between them narrow even further. Not quite lovers, not quite friends, but something deeper and more complicated than either. Something that felt like the beginning of everything. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow blanketing the city in white silence. Iris woke early, nervous energy thrumming through her veins as she thought about Adrian coming to dinner. It was just dinner, she told herself, just a meal between friends. Except they weren't just friends, and hadn't been for months now, and the pretense was becoming harder to maintain with each passing day. Margaret was already in the kitchen when Iris emerged, flour dusting her hands as she prepared pie crust. You're up early, her mother observed. Couldn't sleep? Too much on my mind. A certain tall, dark, and dangerous someone on your mind? Despite her nerves, Iris smiled. Maybe. They spent the morning cooking together, falling into the familiar rhythm of shared work. Turkey, stuffing, roasted vegetables, the sweet potato casserole Margaret had been making since Iris was a child. The apartment filled with warmth and savory smells, transforming their modest space into something that felt like home, in the deepest sense of the word. Adrian arrived at 3, precisely when he'd said he would. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal sweater instead of his usual suit, the casual clothing making him look younger, more approachable. In his hands, he carried a bottle of wine and a box from an expensive bakery. Cannoli, he explained when Margaret opened the box to investigate. From Uncle Vincent's restaurant. He insisted I couldn't come empty-handed. He didn't need to do that, Margaret protested, even as her eyes lit up at the sight of the perfectly crafted pastries. Try telling Vincent that. He thinks everyone is always on the verge of starvation. The easy way Adrian smiled, the comfortable warmth in his voice, made Iris's heart skip. This was the man his family saw, the one who existed outside the cold calculations and controlled power of his business life. She'd seen glimpses of him before, but never so clearly, never so completely. Dinner was simpler than Thanksgiving at Lucia's house, but no less meaningful for it. They sat at the small table in the dining area, knee to knee in the cramped space, and shared a meal that Margaret had poured love into creating. Adrian ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting every dish, drawing Margaret into conversation about her work and her life with the same focused attention he brought to business negotiations. But there was nothing calculating about it. He was simply interested, genuinely curious about the woman who'd raised Iris, and Margaret responded to that interest by opening up in ways Iris rarely saw. She told stories about Iris's childhood, about the struggles and small triumphs that had shaped them both, and Adrian listened like every word mattered. She was always drawing, Margaret said, refilling Adrian's wine glass. Even when we could barely afford food, she'd find scraps of paper and draw. Flowers, mostly, and birds. She loved birds. I didn't know that, Adrian said, glancing at Iris. Iris felt her cheeks warm. It was a long time ago, before watercolors. Do you still draw birds? Sometimes, when I remember to look up and notice them. We should fix that. Adrian's voice was quiet, meant only for her despite her mother's presence. You shouldn't have to remember to notice beautiful things. They should be impossible to miss. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket, warm and heavy with meaning. He wasn't just talking about birds. After dinner, they moved to the living room, cramped but cozy with the small Christmas tree Iris had decorated weeks ago. Margaret put on It's a Wonderful Life, the black and white images flickering across the old television while they drank coffee and ate Vincent's cannoli. Somewhere during the movie, Iris became aware that Adrian had moved closer on the couch, not touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. His arm rested along the back of the couch, not quite around her shoulders, but close enough to feel protective. Margaret noticed too. Iris caught her mother's knowing smile before Margaret excused herself, claiming tiredness even though it was barely 8 o'clock. Your mother is not subtle, Adrian observed once they were alone. She never has been. Iris turned to face him, tucking one leg under her. Thank you for coming. It meant a lot to us. To me. Thank you for inviting me. I haven't had a Christmas this comfortable in years. Adrian shifted, turning toward her as well. My family dinners are wonderful but overwhelming. This was peaceful, real. Real is all we have to offer. It's everything. His hand moved from the back of the couch to her shoulder, a gentle touch that sent shivers down her spine. Iris, I need to tell you something. Her heart started hammering. Okay? I've been patient. I've tried to respect boundaries and give you space to trust me, but I can't keep pretending this is just professional concern or simple friendship. Adrian's dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. I'm falling for you. Maybe I've already fallen, and I need you to know that before we go any further. The confession was everything she'd hoped for and terrified of. Iris felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of his honesty, the vulnerability of a man who showed weakness to no one else. I'm scared, she whispered, of what you are, of what you could do, of how much power you have. I'm scared of trusting you and being wrong. I know, and I can't promise you I'm not dangerous because I am. I can't promise the world I live in isn't dark because it is. Adrian's thumb brushed her shoulder, a gentle counterpoint to his words. But I can promise that I will never use that darkness against you. I can promise that my power will always be used to protect you, never to control you. And I can promise that I'm trying every day to be worthy of your trust. You kept your promise, Iris said. About Derek. Marco told me you've been handling it through legal channels, restraining orders, background checks that mysteriously found his parole violations, pressure on his employer. Nothing violent, nothing permanent. Just systematic consequences until he understood staying away was his only option. Adrian looked surprised. Marco talks too much. He cares about you. He wanted me to know you were keeping your word. Iris reached up and placed her hand over his where it rested on her shoulder. You chose restraint over violence. For me, you chose to be different than what everyone expects. That's when I knew. Knew what? That I was falling for you too. The admission came out barely louder than a breath, but Adrian heard it. She watched his expression shift, watched hope and relief and something fiercer flash across his features. Iris, she kissed him before he could finish, leaning forward to close the small distance between them. Adrian went still for a heartbeat, and then his hand came up to cup her face with such tenderness it made her ache. The kiss was gentle, questioning, as if he was still afraid she might pull away. So Iris pressed closer, her hand sliding up to his shoulders, and kissed him with all the confused feelings she'd been harboring for months. Fear and trust, desire and caution, the terrifying hope that maybe this could work, that maybe he really was different. Adrian made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, his control slipping just enough for her to feel the want beneath it. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and Iris went willingly, climbing into his lap with more courage than she knew she possessed. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, hearts racing in tandem. I've wanted to do that for months, Adrian said roughly. Me too. Iris smiled against his lips. Why didn't you? Because I was terrified of pushing you away. Because you looked at me like I was dangerous, and you were right to look at me that way. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. You're the first person in years who's made me want to be better than what I am. You already are better. You just needed someone to notice. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the newness of it. Iris felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble completely, leaving her vulnerable in a way she'd sworn she'd never be again. But with Adrian's arms around her, his heart beating steady beneath her palm, vulnerability felt less like weakness and more like courage. When they finally pulled apart, Iris settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat while the movie played forgotten on the television. Adrian's hand traced idle patterns on her back, and she thought about how far they'd both come from that suffocating summer morning when he'd first noticed her bruises. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now I take you to dinner. Properly. Not as your boss, but as someone courting you. Adrian's voice held a smile. Now I introduce you to more of my world, the parts that aren't dangerous or dark. Now we figure out how to make this work despite every reason it shouldn't. People will talk. At work, I mean. Let them. I don't care what people think. You might care when it affects business. Iris. Adrian tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. You're more important than business. You're more important than reputation or appearances or what anyone thinks. If this costs me something, then it costs me something. You're worth it. The fierce certainty in his voice made her believe him. Adrian Corvino, who controlled his empire with ruthless efficiency, was telling her she mattered more than all of it. The enormity of that trust, that choice, settled over her like a promise. They stayed on the couch until Margaret emerged from her bedroom an hour later, taking in the scene with knowing satisfaction. I'm making tea, she announced. Would either of you like some? I should go, Adrian said, even as his arms tightened around Iris. It's late. It's barely 9, Margaret countered. Stay for tea, unless Iris wants you to leave. Iris looked up at Adrian, at the man who'd protected her, and been patient with her, and chosen restraint when violence would have been easier. Stay, she said. Please stay. So he did, drinking tea with Margaret and discussing books and the city and 100 inconsequential things while Iris curled against his side, marveling at how natural it felt. When he finally left at 11, he kissed her at the door, sweet and chaste with her mother watching from the kitchen. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow's the day after Christmas. The office is closed. Then I'll see you the day after. Or I could take you to dinner tomorrow night. Your choice. Iris smiled. Dinner tomorrow sounds perfect. She watched from the window as Marco pulled up and Adrian climbed into the car, watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Her lips still tingled from his kisses, her heart still raced with the newness of it all. He's a good man, Margaret said from behind her. Dangerous, yes. Powerful, absolutely. But good. I can see it in how he looks at you. I know. Iris turned to face her mother. I'm still scared. Being scared is smart. But don't let fear stop you from living, baby. Don't let my mistakes become your roadmap. Margaret hugged her daughter tightly. He's not like the others. Give him a chance to prove it. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of dinners and long conversations and stolen kisses when they thought no one was looking. Adrian took her to restaurants she'd only read about in magazines, but also to small places and neighborhoods she didn't know, where he was greeted like family and the food was incredible. He introduced her to parts of the city she'd never explored, showed her beauty in unexpected places, and treated her like she was precious. The office gossip when they returned to work was inevitable, but surprisingly muted. Perhaps because Adrian made it clear through sheer force of presence that Iris was off limits for speculation. Or perhaps because everyone who worked for him had already suspected something was developing and had the good sense not to comment. Either way, Iris found herself settling into a new normal. Secretary by day, girlfriend by night, and somehow both roles felt natural rather than contradictory. January brought cold and gray skies and a brittle tension Iris couldn't quite identify. Adrian was distracted, taking calls at odd hours, spending more time in meetings than usual. When she asked if everything was all right, he simply said business was complicated and kissed her forehead like an apology. Marco seemed more alert too, his casual surveillance sharpening into something more focused. The security around her apartment building increased again, new faces rotating through shifts, and Iris felt the first stirrings of real worry. "Something's wrong," she told Adrian one evening in late January. They were in his apartment for the first time, a penthouse in Manhattan that was beautiful and cold and perfectly controlled. "You're distant, distracted. What's happening?" Adrian set down his glass of wine and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Derek surfaced again. He's been making noise, threatening to cause problems. The name sent ice through her veins. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where he claims I've been harassing him, using illegal means to interfere with his life. He's talking to lawyers, making accusations." Adrian's jaw was tight. "It's nothing that will stick, but it's messy, and messy can be dangerous. Because of me. Because you kept your promise and found legal ways to pressure him instead of just making him disappear. Because I chose to handle things differently than I normally would," Adrian corrected. "And I don't regret that choice, but it's created complications." Iris stood, pacing to the window to look out at the glittering city below. "What does he want?" "Money, probably. Or leverage. Men like Derek always want something." Adrian came up behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "But I won't give him either. I'll handle this." "How?" "Without violence, how do you handle someone who's threatening you?" "Very carefully." Adrian turned her to face him. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She wanted to. Every instinct she'd developed over months of knowing him said Adrian would keep his word, would find a way to resolve this without becoming the violent man everyone expected. But fear whispered other things, reminded her that power corrupted, that men like him solved problems in permanent ways. "Promise me again," Iris said. "Promise me you won't hurt him, even if it would be easier." "I promise. No violence. I'll find another way. Even if it costs you something? Even if it makes you look weak to people who respect strength?" Adrian's expression was fierce. "I don't care how I look. I care about being the man you believe I can be." "That's worth more than any reputation." She believed him. Against all logic and self-preservation, she believed him. The next 2 weeks were tense with waiting. Derek's lawyer sent threatening letters. Adrian's legal team sent careful responses. The dance was complicated and frustrating, and Iris could see the strain it put on Adrian to handle things through proper channels. Just make him go away," Marcus said one evening when Iris was having dinner at the brownstone with Adrian and his family. "You're tying your hands for no reason." "I have a reason," Adrian said quietly, his eyes finding Iris across the table. Marcus followed his gaze and understanding dawned. "She asked you not to." "She asked me to be better, so I'm trying." Lucia, who'd been silent through the exchange, reached over and squeezed Adrian's hand. "Your father would be proud," she said. "He always said the hardest thing in the world was choosing mercy when violence would be easier. You're choosing well." But 3 days later, the choice was tested in ways none of them expected. Iris was leaving work late, catching up on filing that had piled up during a busy week. Marco was waiting downstairs as always, ready to drive her home. The elevator descended smoothly, the building quiet with most employees long gone. The doors opened onto the parking garage level, and Derek was standing there. Iris froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. He looked worse than she remembered, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with the desperate edge of someone who'd run out of options. In his hand was something that made her blood run cold. A gun. "Hello, Iris," Derek said, stepping into the elevator before the doors could close. "We need to talk." "Derek, don't..." "Shut up." He pressed the stop button, freezing the elevator between floors. "You think you can sick your rich boyfriend on me? Think you can ruin my life and there won't be consequences?" "Adrian didn't ruin your life. You did that yourself." The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. Iris tasted blood, felt the hot sting of split skin, and terror flooded through her. This was it. This was the violence she'd been running from, catching up despite all of Adrian's protection. "You destroyed everything," Derek snarled, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "Got me fired, got me arrested for those old warrants, turned your mother against me, all because you couldn't mind your own business. You were hurting her. You hurt me. I barely touched you. You want to know what real hurt feels like?" Derek raised the gun, pressing it against her temple, and Iris stopped breathing. Call your boyfriend. Tell him to back off, pay me what I'm owed, or I pull this trigger right here. Iris's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. Adrian answered on the first ring, his voice tight with concern. Iris? Where are you? Marco said the elevator stopped. I'm in the elevator, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the gun against her head. Derek's here. He has a gun, and he wants to talk to you. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. When Adrian spoke again, his voice was utterly calm, utterly cold. Put him on. Iris handed Derek the phone with trembling hands. Listen to me very carefully, Derek said into the phone. You're going to transfer $2 million to an account I'm going to give you, and you're going to make all these legal problems disappear. Or I'm going to kill your pretty little secretary right here in this elevator. Iris couldn't hear Adrian's response, but she watched Derek's face go pale. I'm not bluffing, Derek insisted. I'll do it. I've got nothing left to lose. More silence. Then Derek's hand tightened on the gun, his desperation turning to rage. You think I won't? You think I'm afraid of you? Whatever Adrian said next made Derek's finger move toward the trigger, and Iris closed her eyes, preparing for the end. But instead of a gunshot, there was a tremendous crash as the elevator doors were pried open from outside. Marco appeared first, moving with lethal speed, disarming Derek before the other man could process what was happening. More men poured in, Adrian's security team, and within seconds Derek was on the floor, restrained and furious. Iris sagged against the elevator wall, her legs refusing to hold her weight. Then Adrian was there, stepping over Derek like he was trash on the floor, reaching for Iris with hands that shook. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? I'm okay. I'm okay. But she was crying now, the terror finally catching up. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. His heart was racing against her ear, his whole body tense with barely controlled emotion. I thought I'd lost you, he said roughly. I thought... I'm okay, she said again, clinging to him. Marco dragged Derek to his feet. What do you want us to do with him? Adrian looked at the man who'd terrorized Iris and her mother, who'd just held a gun to Iris's head and threatened her life. The rage in his eyes was terrible to behold, the kind of cold fury that promised swift and permanent retribution. Iris felt him vibrating with the need for violence, saw his control hanging by a thread. This was the moment where he would either keep his promise or break it, where he would choose the man he'd been or the man he was trying to become. Adrian, she whispered, her hand on his chest. Please. He looked down at her, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes. Every instinct, every ounce of power, every dark impulse that made him who he was, all of it screaming for blood, for permanent solutions, for the kind of justice that left no room for second chances. But then his gaze softened, focusing on her split lip, her tears, her trust. Call the police, Adrian said, his voice like gravel. Tell them we apprehended an armed intruder who threatened an employee. Get him out of my sight before I change my mind. Marco nodded and hauled Derek toward the stairs, the rest of the security team following. Derek was screaming threats and curses, but they echoed emptily in the concrete space. Adrian cupped Iris's face, his thumb gentle on her injured lip. I kept my promise, he said. Even now, even after he put his hands on you again, I kept my promise. Tell me that was the right choice. It was the right choice. Iris kissed his palm, tasting salt from her own tears. You chose to be better. That's always the right choice. He could have killed you, but he didn't, and now he'll face actual justice, not just your version of it. That matters, Adrian. It matters that you chose the hard way. Adrian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips with infinite gentleness. If anything had happened to you, it didn't. I'm okay. We're okay. But they both knew how close it had been, how easily this could have ended differently. That knowledge settled between them, heavy and undeniable. The police came and took statements. Derek was arrested on multiple charges, including assault with a deadly weapon. His lawyer's threatening letters suddenly looked very different in light of an armed confrontation, and even Iris could see that Derek had destroyed his own credibility with one desperate action. Adrian took her to his apartment, refusing to let her out of his sight. He cleaned her split lip with careful hands, applied ice to the bruise already forming on her cheek, and held her while she shook with delayed shock. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I should have handled this differently. Should have found a way to end it before it came to this." "You did handle it. You kept your promise, even when it would have been so easy to break it." Iris pulled back to look at him. "You saved me without becoming the thing I was afraid of. That's everything, Adrian." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It's enough for me." They stayed up all night, talking and not talking, processing what had happened. By dawn, Iris understood with complete clarity that she loved this man, this dangerous, powerful, surprisingly gentle man who'd chosen restraint over violence even when his world had taught him the opposite. And she understood that loving him meant accepting all of him, the darkness and the light, the power and the vulnerability. It meant trusting that he would keep choosing to be better, even when being better was harder than anyone else could understand. "I love you," she said, as sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I'm terrified and probably crazy, but I love you." Adrian's expression transformed, fear and hope and fierce joy all at once. "I love you too. I have for months. I just didn't know if I had the right to say it." "You have the right. You've earned the right." Iris kissed him softly. "Now what?" "Now we move forward. Together." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "And I prove every day that your trust wasn't misplaced." The promise settled over them like a benediction, like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Outside, the city woke to a new day. But inside Adrian's apartment, Iris and Adrian held each other and believed in the possibility of redemption, of transformation, of love strong enough to reshape even the most damaged hearts. The weeks following the elevator incident transformed everything between them in ways both subtle and profound. Adrian became fiercely protective, insisting Iris move into his penthouse until Derek's trial was over and the threat was truly neutralized. She'd resisted at first, clinging to the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain, but one look at the haunted expression in Adrian's eyes had dissolved her objections. "I can't sleep knowing you're across the city," he'd admitted in the quiet hours after the attack. "I close my eyes and see that gun against your head, and I can't breathe. Please, Iris, just until this is over." So she'd packed a bag for what was supposed to be a temporary stay, and Margaret had moved in with her sister in New Jersey, claiming she'd been meaning to visit anyway. The apartment in Queens sat empty while Iris learned to navigate the strange luxury of Adrian's world. The penthouse was beautiful in an austere way, all clean lines and expensive furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. But it lacked warmth, felt more like a showroom than a home, and Iris found herself missing the cramped coziness of her own space. "It's very nice," she said carefully on her third night there, standing in the vast living room while Adrian made dinner in the equally vast kitchen. "But?" Adrian looked up from chopping vegetables, reading her hesitation with the precision he brought to everything. "But it doesn't feel like you. It feels like what someone thought a successful businessman should have." Adrian's hands stilled. He looked around the space as if seeing it for the first time, and something like recognition crossed his features. "You're right. I hired a designer when I bought the place, told them to make it impressive. I never really thought about whether it felt like home." "Does anywhere feel like home to you?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. Adrian set down the knife and leaned against the counter, considering. "Lucia's brownstone, maybe. That's the closest thing I have. Everywhere else is just space I occupy." The admission made Iris's heart ache. She crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "We could change that. Make this place actually yours. Ours, if you want." She felt him tense, then slowly relax into her embrace. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like that very much." So they started small. Iris brought her watercolors and set up a corner of the living room as a painting space, the art supplies and works in progress adding splashes of color to the monochrome palette. Adrian bought books, real books that he actually wanted to read, rather than impressive first editions meant to signal wealth, and they filled the empty shelves together. Margaret came to visit on weekends, bringing home-cooked meals and gentle commentary about how much happier Iris looked, how the shadows under her eyes had finally faded. She and Adrian had developed an easy rapport, built on their shared love for Iris and mutual respect, and watching them joke over dinner made Iris believe that maybe broken families could build new configurations that worked just as well. Work became complicated in ways Iris hadn't anticipated. Being Adrian's girlfriend while also being his secretary created a dynamic she struggled to navigate. She'd always been professional, efficient, invisible when needed, but now everyone knew she was more than just his employee. The whispers were inevitable, speculation about favoritism and whether she'd earned her position through competence or other means. "They think I'm sleeping my way to job security," Iris said one evening, her frustration finally boiling over. "I heard two women from accounting talking in the bathroom about how convenient it must be to date the boss." Adrian looked up from the contract he was reviewing, his expression darkening. "Give me their names. I'll handle it." "No, that's exactly what would make it worse." Iris paced the length of the living room, her emotions tangled and raw. "If you defend me, it just proves their point. That I need you to fight my battles, that I can't handle things on my own." "So what do you want to do?" "I don't know. Maybe I should quit. Find another job where people don't assume I'm trading sexual favors for a paycheck." The words came out harsher than she intended, and she immediately regretted them when she saw Adrian's expression close off, shutting down in that way he did when he was hurt, but didn't want to show it. "If that's what you want," he said carefully. "But don't make that decision based on what small-minded people think. Make it based on what you actually want." "What I want is to be with you without feeling like I'm compromising everything I've worked for." "Then we find a solution that lets you do both." Adrian set aside the contract and came to her, taking her hands in his. "Transfer to a different division. Work for Marcus instead of me. Or I promote you to a position where you're clearly qualified based on merit. Make you director of operations or head of business development. Something where your competence is undeniable. I don't have the experience for those roles. You have the intelligence and the work ethic. The rest you can learn." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the touch grounding. "I've watched you manage my entire schedule, handle sensitive negotiations, and coordinate projects across 6 departments without breaking a sweat. You're more qualified than half the executives I employ. Let me prove it to everyone else." The offer was tempting, but Iris hesitated. People will still say you're showing favoritism. People will always find something to say. The question is whether you're going to let their opinions dictate your life. Adrian's voice was gentle, but firm. "You've spent years making yourself small, invisible, because you thought that was how to survive. But you don't have to do that anymore. Be big. Be visible. Let me help you claim the space you deserve." Iris looked at the man who'd protected her without controlling her, who'd kept his promises even when breaking them would have been easier, who was now offering her a chance to grow beyond the limitations she'd accepted as permanent. And she realized he was right. She'd been so busy trying to prove she didn't need help that she'd forgotten there was a difference between independence and isolation. "Okay," she said, "let's do it. But I earn whatever position you give me. Real work, real expectations, real consequences if I fail." "Agreed. Though you won't fail." "You don't know that." "I know you. That's enough." The announcement came 2 weeks later at the quarterly all-staff meeting. Adrian stood at the podium in the main conference room, addressing the assembled employees with his usual commanding presence, and Iris sat in the back row trying not to look terrified. "As we move into the second quarter, we are implementing some organizational changes," Adrian said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Most notably, we're creating a new position, Director of Strategic Operations. This role will oversee project coordination across all divisions, manage resource allocation, and serve as the central point of communication between department heads and executive leadership." Iris felt every eye in the room turn toward her, the speculation thick enough to choke on. "I'm pleased to announce that Iris Vale will be filling this position, effective immediately." Adrian's gaze found hers across the crowded room, steady and sure. "For those who don't know, Ms. Vale has been my executive assistant for the past 18 months. In that time, she's demonstrated exceptional organizational skills, strategic thinking, and the ability to manage complex projects under pressure. She's more than qualified for this role, and I'm confident she'll exceed expectations." The room erupted in polite applause, though Iris could see the skeptical faces, hear the whispered comments. She stood when Adrian gestured for her to join him at the front, walking to the podium on legs that threatened to give out. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Corvino," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I look forward to proving myself worthy of your confidence." Then she addressed the room directly, meeting the skeptical gazes head-on. I know some of you may have questions about this appointment. I want to be clear. I intend to earn this position through results, not relationships. My door will always be open, and I welcome your feedback as I learn and grow in this role. I hope to demonstrate that merit, not favoritism, is what drives advancement at Corvino Enterprises. It wasn't a perfect speech, but it was honest, and Iris saw some of the skepticism soften into cautious respect. Marcus, sitting in the front row, gave her a subtle nod of approval. Even the women from accounting looked slightly less judgmental. Adrian introduced her new assistant, a sharp young woman named Jennifer, who'd been working in the legal department, and outlined the transition plan. Within an hour, Iris had gone from secretary to director, and the weight of new responsibility settled over her shoulders like a mantle. The learning curve was steep. Iris threw herself into the work with single-minded determination, arriving early and staying late, studying reports and mastering systems and proving to everyone, including herself, that she belonged in this role. Adrian helped when she asked but never hovered, trusting her to find her own way while remaining available for guidance. Marcus became an unexpected ally, offering advice from his own experience climbing the corporate ladder. The first 3 months are critical, he told her over coffee one morning. People are watching to see if you'll sink or swim. Show them you can swim, and half your battles are won. And the other half? The other half is convincing them you're not just swimming because Adrian threw you a life preserver. Marcus's expression was kind, but realistic. You're fighting an uphill battle, Iris. The relationship with my brother makes everything harder. But I've seen your work. You're smart, organized, and you don't back down from challenges. Use that. She did. Iris tackled problems others had been avoiding, streamlined processes that had been inefficient for years, and built relationships across departments through sheer persistent professionalism. Slowly, grudgingly, people started to respect her not as Adrian's girlfriend, but as someone who genuinely knew what she was doing. The work was exhausting, but exhilarating. For the first time in her life, Iris felt like she was building something meaningful, creating value beyond mere survival. The modest salary increase that came with the promotion meant she could help her mother more, could actually start saving for the future instead of living paycheck to paycheck. But the demands of the new role put strain on her relationship with Adrian in ways she hadn't anticipated. They saw each other constantly at work, but the dynamic had shifted. She couldn't just slip into his office for stolen moments anymore. Couldn't let him pull her into his arms between meetings without wondering who was watching and what conclusions they'd draw. I miss you, Adrian said one night in early March, after they'd both worked until 10 and come home to the penthouse too exhausted to do more than eat takeout in front of the television. I'm right here, Iris protested. You're here, but we're both somewhere else, thinking about work, about tomorrow's meetings, about the 100 things that need doing. He pulled her closer on the couch, pressing a kiss to her temple. When's the last time we actually talked? Not about business or schedules, but about us. Iris realized with a start that she couldn't remember. The past month had been a blur of 14-hour days and weekend work sessions, proving herself while also maintaining their relationship, and somewhere in the chaos she'd lost track of the connection that made everything else worthwhile. I'm sorry, she said, turning to face him fully. I've been so focused on proving I earned this position that I forgot to make time for what actually matters. We both did. I've been watching you work yourself to exhaustion because I wanted to prove I wasn't showing you favoritism, that you could succeed on your own merits. Adrian's expression was rueful. Turns out we're both idiots. Speak for yourself. I prefer overachieving perfectionist. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and some of the tension between them eased. Tomorrow's Saturday. No work. Just us. What do you want to do? Sleep until noon. Order breakfast in bed. Maybe paint while you read. Nothing productive or impressive, just existing together. That sounds perfect. They did exactly that, and the simple pleasure of unhurried time together reminded Iris why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Adrian reading in the armchair while she painted at her makeshift studio space, the comfortable silence broken only by the occasional comment or shared observation, felt more intimate than any grand gesture. I painted you, Iris admitted late that afternoon, showing him the watercolor portrait she'd been working on for weeks. She'd captured him in an unguarded moment, the severe lines of his face softened by something that looked almost like peace. Adrian studied the painting with an intensity that made her nervous. "This is how you see me?" "Sometimes, when you let your guard down. I look almost human." "You are human, Adrian. That's what I've been trying to show you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Iris lost herself in the taste of him, the feel of his hand sliding into her hair, the way he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Iris went completely still. "What?" "Marry me." Adrian pulled back enough to meet her eyes, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. "I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring out how to balance work and us, and you're building your career, and 1,000 other rational reasons to wait. But I don't want to wait. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a home with you, have children with you if you want them, grow old watching you paint and arguing about whose turn it is to choose what we watch on television. I want everything, Iris, with you, only you." Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst. "You're serious?" "Completely, utterly, terrifyingly serious." Adrian's hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I love you. I've loved you since you stood in my office with bruises on your face and refused my help because you're too proud and stubborn for your own good. I've loved you through every moment since then. Marry me, Iris. Let me spend my life proving I'm worthy of your trust." The tears came without permission, spilling down her cheeks even as she smiled. "You've already proved it. Every day, every choice, every time you chose to be better than what people expected. You've proved it 1,000 times over. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Iris laughed through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, even though you're right that it's fast and possibly crazy and definitely complicated. I can handle complicated. Complicated is my specialty." He kissed her again, and this time neither of them held back. Adrian lifted her easily, carrying her to the bedroom while she laughed against his mouth. And they spent the rest of the afternoon showing each other without words how much this mattered, how deeply the love ran, how complete the trust had become. Later, lying tangled together in the sheets with afternoon light painting gold across the walls, Adrian traced idle patterns on her shoulder. "We should tell our families, before word gets out and Lucia hears it from someone else. She'll have opinions. She always has opinions. But she loves you, so at least they'll be favorable opinions." They told Lucia first, driving to the brownstone on Sunday for family dinner. Adrian had called ahead to make sure everyone would be there, and when they walked in, the entire family was assembled in the living room, looking curious and slightly concerned. "Whatever you've done, we'll help you fix it," Marcus said immediately. "That's the Corvino way." "No one's done anything wrong," Adrian assured him. "We just have some news." He looked at Iris, giving her the option to make the announcement, and she loved him even more for that small gesture of partnership. "We're engaged," she said, holding up her left hand where a simple but beautiful diamond ring now resided. Adrian had produced it seemingly from nowhere an hour after she'd said yes, and she suspected he'd been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The room erupted. Lucia pulled Iris into a fierce hug, speaking rapid Italian that sounded like blessings mixed with warnings. Maria and Elena descended with excited questions about wedding plans. Marcus shook Adrian's hand with genuine happiness, and even Vincent got misty-eyed. "You make him human again," Lucia said later, pulling Iris aside while the others argued about wedding venues. "I watched my grandson build walls around his heart after his father died. Walls so high I worried no one would ever get through. But you did. You reminded him that strength can be gentle, that power doesn't have to corrupt. That's a gift, child. Don't ever doubt your worth." The words settled into Iris's chest, warm and affirming. "Thank you for welcoming me, for accepting me. I know my background isn't... Your background is you survived and thrived despite hardship. That makes you strong. That makes you perfect for Adrian." Lucia's gaze was sharp but kind. He needs someone who understands struggle, who won't be impressed by money or power. Someone who sees the man, not the empire. You're exactly what he needs. Margaret's reaction was more complicated. When Iris called to share the news, there was a long pause before her mother spoke. "Are you sure about this, honey? It's only been a few months." I'm sure, Mom, I love him. I know you do, but love isn't always enough. Marriage to a man like Adrian, it comes with complications. Danger. You'll always be looking over your shoulder, wondering if his enemies will target you. Derek already tried. We survived that. Derek was one small-time thug with a grudge. Adrian operates in a different league. Are you prepared for what that means? Margaret's voice was gentle, but worried. I just want you to be safe, baby. To be happy. I want to know you've thought this through. I have thought it through. Every angle, every risk, every possible consequence. Iris looked across the brownstone living room to where Adrian was helping his niece build something complicated out of blocks, his severe features soft with concentration. And I choose this anyway. I choose him because he makes me happier than I've ever been, and because I trust him to keep me safe without making me small. That's worth the risk. Margaret sighed, the sound carrying years of worry and hard-won wisdom. Then I'm happy for you, truly. Just promise me you'll keep your eyes open. Don't let love make you blind to danger. I promise. Planning the wedding became its own kind of adventure. Lucia wanted a traditional Italian ceremony with hundreds of guests. Marcus suggested something elegant but small. Elena pushed for a destination wedding. Margaret worried about costs. And through it all, Adrian and Iris tried to figure out what they actually wanted. We could elope, Adrian suggested one evening when the planning had become particularly overwhelming. Fly to Italy, get married in some small village, just us and whoever wants to come. Your grandmother would never forgive us. She'd get over it eventually, probably by the time our grandchildren were born. Iris laughed, imagining Lucia's reaction. We can't do that to her. Family matters too much to both of us. So what do? We compromise. Small ceremony, immediate family only, then a larger reception where Lucia can invite everyone she's ever met and feed them until they can't move. Iris took his hand, lacing their fingers together. We make it about the marriage, not the wedding. About building a life together, not throwing the perfect party. Adrian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. How did I get so lucky? You noticed a woman with bruises on her face and chose kindness over indifference. That's not luck, that's character. They settled on a date in late May, giving themselves enough time to plan properly, but not so much time that the anticipation became torture. The ceremony would be at Lucia's church, small and traditional, followed by a reception at a restaurant Vincent knew. Simple, meaningful, focused on the people who mattered most. Work continued to be demanding, but rewarding. Iris had been in her new role for 3 months and had successfully implemented 2 major process improvements that saved the company significant time and money. The skepticism had largely faded, replaced by grudging respect and, in some cases, genuine appreciation for her leadership. But there were still challenges. A senior executive named Richard Pearson made his displeasure with her promotion clear at every opportunity, questioning her decisions in meetings and undermining her authority whenever possible. He'd been with the company for 15 years and clearly resented being outranked by someone so young, and as he put it, inexperienced. He's a problem, Marcus warned after a particularly contentious meeting where Richard had challenged Iris's proposed resource allocation. He's connected, brings in a lot of business, and he's been angling for a VP position for years. Your promotion blocked his path, and he's not handling it well. What do? I can't fire him just for being difficult. No, but you can document everything. Every time he undermines you, every time he ignores directives, every instance of insubordination. Build a case. Marcus's expression was serious. And watch your back. Richard plays dirty when he feels threatened. The warning proved prophetic. 2 weeks later, Iris discovered that several of her project directives had been ignored by Richard's team, resulting in missed deadlines and angry clients. When she confronted him, Richard smiled blandly and claimed there had been a miscommunication. Your instructions weren't clear, he said, his tone just shy of insolent. My team didn't understand what you wanted. I sent written directives with specific timelines and deliverables. There was nothing unclear about them. Well, perhaps if you had more experience in this industry, you'd know how to communicate more effectively with senior staff. The condescension in his voice made Iris's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral. I expect your team to complete the delayed projects by end of week. And going forward, if there's any confusion about my directives, I expect you to ask for clarification immediately rather than simply ignoring them. Of course, Director Vale, whatever you say. Iris documented the conversation and copied Adrian's office on the email, not asking for help but creating a paper trail. When she got home that night, frustrated and angry, Adrian was waiting with wine and sympathy. "Richard's testing you," he said after she'd vented about the day. "He wants to see if you'll crack under pressure or run to me for protection. I won't do either." "I know. But you should also know that if he crosses a line, I won't hesitate to handle it." Define handle it. Adrian's smile was sharp. Legal, professional, and utterly devastating to his career. Nothing violent, just strategic consequences for someone who's forgotten that respect isn't optional. "Let me handle it my way first. If I can't resolve it, then we'll discuss strategic consequences." "Fair enough. But the offer stands." Iris kissed him, grateful for his support even as she was determined to prove she could handle her own battles. "Thank you for trusting me to fight my own fights." "Always. Though I reserve the right to destroy anyone who seriously threatens you. As long as destroy is metaphorical and doesn't involve anyone getting hurt. Metaphorical destruction is my specialty. Ask Richard's predecessor, who now works in a mailroom in Tulsa." Iris decided she probably didn't want to know the details of that story. April brought warmer weather and wedding preparations that consumed every spare moment. Iris found her dress, a simple but elegant design that made her feel beautiful without trying too hard. Margaret helped with flowers, choosing arrangements that were lovely but budget-conscious. Lucia took charge of the menu, creating a feast that would make Vincent's restaurant the talk of the neighborhood. And through it all, Adrian remained steady, handling last-minute details and family drama with the same calm competence he brought to business negotiations. Watching him coordinate with florists and argue with his uncle about wine selections made Iris fall in love with him all over again. "You're enjoying this," she accused one evening when she found him reviewing seating charts with an intensity usually reserved for merger agreements. "I'm ensuring everything is perfect for you. That's different from enjoying it." "You're enjoying it." Adrian looked up, and the smile he gave her was warm and unguarded. "Maybe a little. Is that so surprising?" "Yes, actually, I didn't think wedding planning would be your thing." "It's not the wedding planning. It's the fact that in 6 weeks, you'll be my wife. That part I'm very much enjoying anticipating." The word sent warmth flooding through her. My wife. She'd be Iris Corvino, bound to this man not just by love, but by legal and spiritual commitment. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. "I can't wait either," she admitted. The final weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of final fittings and rehearsals and administrative details. Richard continued to be difficult at work, but Iris had built such a strong case of documented insubordination that HR was finally taking notice. The satisfaction of watching him squirm under official scrutiny was better than any revenge Adrian could have orchestrated. "You're terrifying when you're methodical," Marcus observed after a particularly effective meeting where Iris had calmly dismantled every one of Richard's excuses. "Remind me never to get on your bad side. Just treat me with respect and we'll be fine." Adrian chose well. "You're every bit as strategic as he is, just with better people skills." The compliment meant more than Marcus probably realized. Iris had worked so hard to prove herself, to show that she belonged in this world not because of who she loved, but because of who she was. Hearing it acknowledged by someone as sharp as Marcus felt like validation of everything she'd sacrificed. The week before the wedding, Adrian surprised her with a weekend trip to a small coastal town 2 hours north of the city. "Last chance for us to be just Adrian and Iris before we become Mr. and Mrs. Corvino," he explained. "I wanted some time that was just ours." They stayed in a small bed and breakfast, walked along the beach, ate seafood at tiny restaurants where no one knew who they were or cared about. Corvino Enterprises or wedding planning or anything beyond whether they wanted more wine with dinner. It was perfect in its simplicity, a reminder that beneath all the complexity of their lives, they were just two people who loved each other. "Thank you for this," Iris said their last evening, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink, "for remembering that we need moments like this. We'll always need moments like this. Reminders that the empire and the work and all of it matters less than this." Adrian wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. You and me. That's what actually matters. Iris leaned into his warmth, feeling safer and more loved than she'd ever imagined possible. The girl who'd hidden bruises under makeup and thought herself unworthy of protection felt like someone from another life. Adrian had helped her become someone new, someone stronger, and she'd done the same for him. Together, they'd proved that love could transform even the most broken hearts into something whole. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect May sunshine streaming through the windows of Lucia's brownstone, where Iris had spent the night surrounded by the women of Adrian's family. She woke to the sound of Maria and Elena arguing cheerfully about makeup techniques while Lucia presided over breakfast preparations downstairs, her commands to various helpers carrying up through the old house with affectionate authority. Margaret sat in the corner of the bedroom, already dressed in the soft blue dress they'd chosen together, watching her daughter with eyes that held both joy and the shadow of old sorrows. "You look beautiful already," she said, as Iris emerged from the bathroom, freshly showered and wrapped in a robe. "I haven't even started getting ready yet." "Doesn't matter. You're glowing." Margaret crossed the room and took Iris's hand, squeezing them gently. "I need to say something before the day gets away from us." Iris's stomach tightened with sudden nervousness. "Mom, I was wrong about so many things. About men, about trust, about what you deserve from life." Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. "I taught you to be small, to hide, to never expect too much because wanting more only led to disappointment. I taught you my pain instead of my hope, and I'm sorry for that. You protected me the best way you knew how." "Maybe. But Adrian, he's shown both of us that protection doesn't have to mean making yourself invisible. That strength can be gentle. That power doesn't always corrupt." Margaret's eyes were wet now, tears tracking down her cheeks despite her smile. "You found something I never could, baby. You found a man who makes you bigger instead of smaller. Hold on to that. Build a life on that. And don't ever let my mistakes become your roadmap." Iris pulled her mother into a fierce hug, both of them crying now, releasing years of accumulated fear and pain in the safe space of this moment. "I love you, Mom. Everything we survived made me strong enough to recognize what Adrian was offering. That's your gift to me, even if you didn't mean it that way. Then I'm glad something good came from it all." The next hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Elena did Iris's makeup with professional skill, keeping it natural but polished, enhancing rather than masking. Maria handled her hair, pulling it into an elegant updo that left soft tendrils framing her face. And when Iris finally stepped into her dress, the simple ivory gown transforming her into something that made even practical Lucia get misty-eyed, she barely recognized herself. "Adrian's going to forget how to breathe," Elena declared, stepping back to admire their collective work. "Good. He deserves to be knocked speechless at least once," Maria added with a grin. Lucia produced a small velvet box from her pocket. "This was my mother's," she said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold bracelet. "Something old. My mother wore it when she married. I wore it when I married, and now you should wear it too. Welcome to the family, child." The gesture made Iris's throat tight with emotion. She'd had so little family for so long, and now she was being embraced by these strong, loving women who'd chosen to claim her as one of their own. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything, for accepting me, for loving Adrian, for making me feel like I belong." "You do belong," Lucia said firmly, fastening the bracelet around Iris's wrist. "You belonged from the moment you made my grandson remember how to smile. Now let's go marry him before he paces a hole in the church floor." The ceremony was held at St. Anthony's, the small neighborhood church where Lucia had worshipped for 40 years. The interior was simple but beautiful, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows and casting colored patterns across the wooden pews. White flowers filled the space with subtle fragrance, and the handful of guests who'd been invited filled the first few rows with their warmth and joy. Iris waited in the vestibule with her mother, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Through the doors, she could hear the opening notes of the music, the signal that it was time. "Ready?" Margaret asked, offering her arm. "More than ready." The doors opened, and Iris stepped into the church to find Adrian waiting at the altar. He wore a dark suit tailored perfectly to his frame, his expression composed and controlled in that way she knew so well. But when his eyes found hers, something in his face cracked open. revealing wonder and love and a vulnerability that made her breath catch. She walked toward him with her mother at her side, passing Marcus and Elena and their children, Uncle Vincent and Maria, friends from work who'd become genuine supporters, and finally Lucia in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief while trying to maintain her dignified composure. When they reached the altar, the priest asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" "I do," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She kissed Iris's cheek, then placed her daughter's hand in Adrian's with a whispered, "Take care of my girl." "Always," Adrian promised quietly, and Margaret stepped back to take her seat. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of traditional vows and readings and rituals that had been performed in this church for generations. But what Iris would remember later, what would stay with her through all the years to come, was the way Adrian looked at her as he spoke his vows. Not like she was a prize he'd won or a possession he'd claimed, but like she was a miracle he'd been given and couldn't quite believe was real. "I, Adrian, take you, Iris, to be my wife," he said, his voice low but absolutely steady. "I promise to protect you without controlling you, to support you without diminishing you, to love you without conditions or reservations. I promise to choose restraint over violence, compassion over cruelty, and mercy over vengeance, because you've shown me that strength doesn't have to destroy. I promise to be worthy of your trust every day of my life, because that trust is the most precious gift I've ever been given." The personalized vows weren't traditional, and Iris saw the priest's eyebrows raise slightly, but she didn't care. These were the promises that mattered, the ones that acknowledged who they'd been and who they were choosing to become together. When it was her turn, Iris's voice shook only slightly as she spoke. "I, Iris, take you, Adrian, to be my husband. I promise to trust you even when fear tells me not to believe in your goodness even when the world sees only your power, to stand beside you as an equal partner in building a life based on love rather than survival. I promise to never make myself small, to make you feel big, and to remind you every day that gentleness is strength, that patience is power, and that choosing to be better than what's expected is the bravest thing anyone can do." Adrian's hands tightened on hers, and she saw his jaw clench with emotion he was fighting to control. But a single tear escaped anyway, tracking down his cheek, and Iris reached up to brush it away with her thumb. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Adrian pulled her close and kissed her with such tender reverence that Iris felt her own tears finally spill over. This was it, the moment everything changed and nothing changed, because they had already chosen each other long before this ceremony made it official. The reception at Vincent's restaurant was everything Lucia had promised, and more. The space had been transformed with flowers and candles and enough food to feed a small army. Music played, wine flowed, and the assembled guests celebrated with genuine joy the union of two people who'd found each other against impossible odds. Iris danced with Adrian while their families watched, swaying to music that wrapped around them like a blessing. "Happy?" he murmured against her ear. "Deliriously. You? More than I knew how to be." Adrian pulled back enough to look at her, his expression open and unguarded in a way it never was anywhere but with her. "Thank you for saying yes, for trusting me, for believing I could be better. You were always better. You just needed someone to see it." They danced through 3 songs before Marcus cut in, claiming his right as best man to dance with the bride. Elena swept Adrian away with bossy efficiency, and Iris found herself being passed from family member to family member, each one offering advice or jokes or heartfelt wishes for happiness. Uncle Vincent was surprisingly sentimental. Adrian was lost for a long time after his father died, he confided as they waltzed somewhat clumsily. "Built walls so high the rest of us worried he'd suffocate behind them. But you climbed those walls like they were nothing. Reminded him what it means to be human. That's love, Piccola, real love that transforms." Lucia's dance was brief but meaningful. "You make him happy," she said simply. "That's all a grandmother can ask for. Well, that and great-grandchildren, but we have time for that." Iris laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "One thing at a time." "Fair enough, but don't wait too long. I'm not getting any younger." Margaret's turn came late in the evening, when the party had mellowed into comfortable conversation and the dancing had slowed to couples swaying together. "I never thought I'd see you this happy," her mother admitted. Never thought either of us would find this kind of peace. We both deserve it, Mom. You deserve it too. Maybe, but watching you find it is enough for me right now. Margaret hugged her daughter tightly. Be happy, baby. That's all I ever wanted for you, even when I didn't know how to help you get there. The evening wound down eventually, guests departing with full stomachs and happy hearts, until only the immediate family remained. Adrian's jacket was long gone, his tie loosened, his normally controlled appearance relaxed into something more human. Iris had kicked off her heels hours ago, and now stood barefoot in her wedding dress, exhausted but exhilarated. Ready to go home? Adrian asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Home. The penthouse they'd slowly transformed from sterile showroom into actual living space, filled now with her paintings and his books and the accumulated evidence of a life shared. More than ready. They said their goodbyes and escaped into the cool May night, Marco driving them through quiet streets while they sat in the back seat holding hands and stealing kisses like teenagers. The city sparkled around them, familiar and new all at once, and Iris thought about how far she'd come from the terrified woman who'd hidden bruises and believed herself unworthy of protection. The penthouse welcomed them with warm lights and open spaces that finally felt like home. Adrian carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they stood in the living room surrounded by evidence of their shared life. Her watercolors on the walls, his grandmother's Afghan draped over the couch, the collection of books and photos and small treasures they'd accumulated together. I have something for you, Adrian said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. Wedding gift. Inside was a deed to a house in the same Brooklyn neighborhood where Lucia lived. Not huge, but beautiful, a brownstone 3 doors down from the family home, with a garden and enough rooms to grow into. Adrian, this is too much. It's not too much. It's a place where we can build something that's entirely ours while still being close to family. A place with room for your art studio and my home office, and eventually, if you want them, children who'll grow up surrounded by the same kind of love I had. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones in that gesture she'd come to love. I want to build a real life with you, Iris. Not just exist in this beautiful cage, but actually live somewhere that feels like us. Iris looked at the deed, at the address that would become theirs, and felt the last piece of her old life fall away. No more survival mode. No more making herself small. Just the vast, terrifying, wonderful possibility of actually being happy. When can we move in? Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year. There's no rush. I want to start now. Start building our life, our home, our future. She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. Thank you for this, for all of it, for seeing me when I was trying to be invisible, for being patient when I was scared, for choosing to be better than what the world expected. Thank you for believing I could be better, for trusting me with your heart when you had every reason not to. Adrian lifted her easily, carrying her toward the bedroom. Now let me show you exactly how grateful I am. The honeymoon was a week in Italy, visiting the small village where Lucia's family had originated. They stayed in a tiny hotel overlooking rolling hills covered in vineyards, ate incredible food, and spent long afternoons doing nothing but existing together without the weight of expectations or responsibilities. We should talk about the future, Iris said one evening as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Real plans, not just dreams. Okay, what are you thinking? I want to keep working, at least for a while. I've worked too hard to prove myself to give it up now. She paused, gathering courage. But eventually, I'd like to have children. Maybe 2, if we're lucky. And I'd like to use some of what we have to help other women in situations like I was in, shelters, job training programs, resources to help them escape and rebuild. Adrian was quiet for a moment, processing. That sounds perfect. All of it. What timeline are you thinking? A few more years of work, build up the programs at Corvino Enterprises, maybe transition into a consulting role where I have more flexibility. Start the foundation work alongside that. Have kids when we're ready, not when anyone else thinks we should. She looked at him, searching his expression for reaction. Does that work for you? It works perfectly. I want you to have everything you want, Iris. Career, family, purpose beyond just being my wife. You're too smart and too capable to be limited by what anyone else thinks you should do. Adrian pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. We'll build it all together. The foundation, the family, the life. Whatever you want. What do you want? Honestly, I want to step back from some of the darker aspects of the business. I've spent years building this empire, making sure I was never powerless again, but somewhere along the way I forgot to actually live. He gestured to the peaceful Italian countryside surrounding them. I want more of this. More time with family, more moments that matter, less time managing problems and making sure everyone knows I'm not someone to cross. I want to be known for building things rather than destroying them. The admission was huge, a complete reimagining of the life Adrian had built for himself. What would that look like practically? Transition more of the day-to-day operations to Marcus. Focus Corvino enterprises on the legitimate businesses, real estate, construction, import-export, and gradually distance from the other elements. Use the power I've accumulated to actually help people rather than just protect my interests. Adrian's voice was thoughtful, like he was working through ideas he'd been harboring but never spoken aloud. It won't happen overnight. There are commitments, relationships, expectations that take time to unwind. But in 5 years, 10 years, I could be someone different. We could build something better. That's what I want too, Iris said softly. To build something better. Together. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the village below, church bells rang, calling people to evening services. The sound drifted up to them, peaceful and timeless, and Iris thought about how far they'd both come and how far they still had to go. When they returned to the city a week later, tanned and rested and more connected than ever, the brownstone Adrian had given her was waiting. They spent weekends slowly moving in, choosing furniture together and painting walls and transforming the empty house into a home that reflected both of them. Iris set up her art studio in the room with the best light, while Adrian claimed a smaller space for his office. The rest they left open, potential waiting to be filled. Margaret visited often, marveling at the garden and the neighborhood and the security of knowing her daughter was truly safe and happy. She'd started dating someone new, a gentle widower she'd met through her work, and the tentative hope in her voice when she talked about him made Iris's heart glad. Work at Corvino Enterprises continued to evolve. Richard Pearson had finally been let go after one too many instances of insubordination, replaced by someone who understood that competence mattered more than tenure. Iris's programs had proven successful enough that she was being courted by consulting firms, offered positions that would give her more flexibility and influence across multiple companies rather than just one. "What do you think?" she asked Adrian one evening, showing him the latest offer. "It's a lot of money and a lot of freedom, but it would mean leaving Corvino Enterprises. I think you should do whatever makes you happiest. You've proven yourself 1,000 times over. You don't owe the company anything beyond what you've already given." Adrian pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Take the consulting position. Build your own reputation independent of me. Show the world what you're capable of." So she did. The transition took 3 months of training her replacement and finishing ongoing projects. But by September, Iris was officially an independent consultant specializing in organizational efficiency and strategic operations. Her first client was a nonprofit serving domestic violence survivors. And the irony wasn't lost on her that she'd come full circle from victim to advocate. The foundation launched that same month. The Corvino Foundation for Family Safety focused on helping women and children escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. Adrian provided the initial funding, but Iris ran it with fierce dedication, pouring everything she'd learned from her own experiences into creating resources she'd desperately needed years ago. Margaret became an unexpected asset, her experience as a survivor giving her insight into what women actually needed versus what well-meaning outsiders thought they needed. She started volunteering at the foundation's shelter, offering the kind of practical, compassionate support that could only come from someone who'd lived through the same struggles. "I'm proud of you," she told Iris at the foundation's official opening event. "You took something terrible and turned it into something beautiful. That's real strength, baby. That's how you know you've healed." The work was hard but meaningful in ways Iris's corporate job had never been. Every woman she helped, every child who found safety through the foundation's programs, felt like a small victory against the violence and fear that had once controlled her own life. And Adrian supported it all, Not just financially, but emotionally, understanding that this work was healing for both of them. True to his word, he'd begun the slow process of transitioning away from the darker elements of his business. It was complicated and sometimes dangerous, unwinding relationships and obligations that went back years, but Adrian approached it with the same strategic patience he brought to everything else. Some nights he came home tense and frustrated, the weight of old commitments pressing down on him, but he never wavered in his determination to become someone better. "I had a meeting with the Castellano family today," he told Iris one evening in late November, his voice tight with stress. "They're not happy about me pulling back from certain operations, said I was breaking faith with old alliances." "What did you tell them?" "That my priorities have changed, that I'm building something different, and they can either respect that or cut ties entirely." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "They threatened to make things difficult, suggested there might be consequences for turning my back on them." Fear spiked through Iris. "What kind of consequences?" "The kind where they remind me why these alliances existed in the first place. Why protection and mutual interests matter in our world." He pulled her close, his embrace tight and slightly desperate. "I won't let anything happen to you, to us. Whatever it costs, I'll keep you safe. I know you will. But I also know you'll do it the right way, without becoming what they expect." Iris pulled back to look at him directly. "You've spent 2 years proving you're different. Don't let fear make you forget that now." The Castellano situation resolved itself over the next few weeks through careful negotiation and strategic compromise. Adrian gave them certain concessions in exchange for being released from other obligations, and while neither side was completely happy, it was enough to maintain peace. Marcus proved invaluable in the negotiations, his legal expertise helping to navigate the complex web of agreements and expectations. "You're doing the impossible," Marcus told Adrian after the final meeting, "walking away from this life without getting killed or destroyed in the process. I didn't think it could be done. It might not be done yet, but I'm committed to trying." Christmas that year was spent at the Brownstone, their first holiday in their actual home. The house was filled with family and laughter and the smell of Lucia's cooking, and Iris thought about how different this Christmas was from the one 2 years ago when she'd nervously invited Adrian to dinner in her cramped apartment. "Happy?" Adrian asked late that night, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up the remnants of the celebration. "Impossibly happy. You?" "More than I deserve." He pulled her into his arms, swaying to music only they could hear. "Thank you for this. For the family, the foundation, the life we're building. For believing I could be more than what I was. You were always more. I just helped you see it." The new year brought new challenges and new joys. The foundation expanded to serve more women, the consulting business grew beyond what Iris had hoped, and Adrian successfully extricated himself from another layer of problematic business entanglements. They talked about starting a family, decided to wait another year, and spent their time strengthening the foundation they'd built together. In March, Iris discovered she was pregnant despite their careful planning. The news sent her into a spiral of complicated emotions, joy and terror and everything in between. They'd wanted children eventually, but was now the right time? Was she ready? Was the world safe enough? "We'll figure it out," Adrian said when she finally told him, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Whatever you want to do, however you want to handle this, we'll figure it out together. I want to keep it, the baby. I want this." Iris covered his hands with hers, feeling the first fragile stirrings of maternal love. "I'm just scared." "I know, so am I. But we'll be scared together, and somehow that makes it manageable." They told the family at Easter, gathering everyone at Lucia's brownstone for the announcement. The response was predictably enthusiastic, Lucia immediately launching into plans for the nursery and baby showers, and 100 other things Iris hadn't even begun to consider. "A baby," Margaret said wonderingly, her hand on Iris's stomach with gentle reverence. "I'm going to be a grandmother. I never thought—" Her voice broke, and she pulled Iris into a fierce hug. "You're going to be such a good mother, baby. Better than I ever was. You were exactly the mother I needed, Mom. You taught me to survive, and that survival led me here. That's a gift." The pregnancy was smooth and unremarkable, which Iris found both boring and reassuring. She worked through the first 2 trimesters, only cutting back when her consulting clients started worrying about her traveling while heavily pregnant. Adrian was attentive without being smothering, researching everything obsessively and driving her to every appointment, and generally being the kind of involved father-to-be that made other women envious. "You're going to be insufferable when the baby actually arrives," Iris accused affectionately in her 8th month, watching him assemble yet another piece of nursery furniture with intense concentration. "I prefer thoroughly prepared. You've read more parenting books than I have. I want to do this right. Want to be the kind of father my dad was before he was taken from us." Adrian's voice was quiet, vulnerable. "I want our child to grow up knowing they're loved and safe, and that power doesn't have to corrupt." Iris's heart melted. "They will. You're already an amazing father, and they're not even here yet." Their daughter arrived in early November, a week before her due date, with dark hair and her father's serious expression. They named her Sophia Margaret Corvino, honoring both grandmothers, and she was perfect in the way all babies are perfect, tiny and helpless and requiring every ounce of energy they possessed. Adrian proved to be exactly the kind of father Iris had known he would be, patient and gentle and completely devoted. He took 2 months off work, something unheard of in his world, and spent his time learning to change diapers and soothe nighttime crying and rock Sophia to sleep while singing Italian lullabies his grandmother had taught him. "You're different with her," Iris observed one night, watching Adrian cradle their sleeping daughter with such tenderness it made her want to cry. "Softer somehow. She makes me want to be better. Both of you do." Adrian looked up, his expression open and unguarded. "I spent so many years being hard, being the person people feared because I thought that was strength. But this—" He gestured to Sophia, to Iris, to the home they'd built together. "This is actual strength, choosing gentleness, protecting without destroying, being vulnerable enough to love completely." The words were everything Iris had been trying to show him for 3 years, finally integrated so completely into who he was that he could articulate it himself. "You've come so far from the man I met that first summer. We both have. You're not the scared woman hiding bruises anymore, and I'm not the cold businessman who solved every problem with power." Adrian stood carefully, still cradling Sophia, and crossed to sit beside Iris on the couch. "We saved each other, built something better out of our broken pieces." They sat together in the quiet of their home, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, and Iris thought about the impossible journey that had brought them here, from bruises and fear to love and family, from power wielded cruelly to strength used to protect and nurture, from 2 damaged people to a partnership that had transformed them both. The foundation continued to grow, helping more women every year. Adrian completed his transition away from the darker elements of his empire, building a legacy of legitimate business and philanthropic work that would outlast the reputation he'd once cultivated. Margaret flourished in her relationship with the gentle widower, finding the peaceful love she'd always deserved. And Sophia grew, surrounded by family who adored her, and parents who showed her every day that strength and gentleness could coexist. 5 years after that suffocating summer morning when Adrian had first noticed Iris's bruises, they stood in the foundation's new facility at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The building was beautiful and functional, designed specifically to serve women and children escaping violence. It had safe rooms and counseling spaces and job training facilities and everything Iris had once desperately needed. "This is your legacy," Adrian said, watching her address the crowd of supporters and survivors and volunteers. "You took your pain and turned it into hope for others. That's the most powerful thing anyone can do. We did it together. Your resources, my experience, our shared commitment to being better than what we were." Iris squeezed his hand, watching Sophia play with her cousin under Marcus's watchful eye. "This is what real power looks like. Not control or fear, but transformation and healing." The speech she gave that day was simple and honest. Iris told her story, not all of it, but enough to help others understand that she'd been where they were, that escape was possible, that they deserved safety and dignity and the chance to rebuild. She talked about the man who'd seen her bruises and chosen to help without conditions, who'd proven that not all powerful men were dangerous, that strength could be gentle, and protection didn't have to come with strings attached. "I'm not special," she concluded, looking out at the faces watching her, survivors and supporters, and the woman she'd once been reflected in their eyes. "I'm just someone who got lucky enough to find people who believed I deserved better." And now I want to make sure all of you have the same chance. The chance to escape, to heal, to build lives based on safety rather than survival. The chance to be seen and valued and protected without losing yourselves in the process. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered more were the tears, the understanding, the recognition in the eyes of women who saw their own stories reflected in hers. This was why the foundation existed. This was the difference they could make. That evening, back in their brownstone with Sophia tucked into bed and the city lights glittering beyond the windows, Iris and Adrian sat together in comfortable silence. 3 years of marriage, 5 years of knowing each other, and a lifetime of love stretching out before them. "Do you ever regret it?" Iris asked quietly. "Choosing this path instead of the easier one, walking away from the power and influence you'd built?" "Not once. Not for a single moment." Adrian pulled her closer, his arms secure and steady around her. "I lost nothing that actually mattered and gained everything I didn't know I needed. You, Sophia, this life we've built, that's worth more than any empire." "Even when it's hard? When old associates make trouble or people question whether you've gone soft?" "Especially then. Because every time I choose the harder path, every time I prove that strength doesn't require cruelty, I become more of the man you believed I could be." Adrian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips with infinite tenderness. "You saved me, Iris. From becoming a monster, from a life devoid of actual meaning, from dying inside while everyone thought I was powerful. You showed me there was a different way. You saved me too, from a life of hiding and fear, from believing I deserved the violence I'd experienced, from thinking I had to face everything alone." Iris looked up at him, this man who'd transformed himself for love, and felt gratitude so profound it ached. We saved each other. That's what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves. They sat together as the night deepened, and the city settled into sleep, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something luminous. The foundation would help thousands of women over the years to come. Sophia would grow up knowing that her father's power came from choosing mercy over violence, that her mother's strength came from refusing to stay broken. And Iris and Adrian would spend their lives proving that transformation was always possible, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that choosing to be better than what the world expected was the bravest and most powerful thing anyone could do. What began with bruises and fear had become trust and family and a love strong enough to reshape not just two damaged hearts, but the world around them. And in the quiet of their home, surrounded by evidence of the life they'd built from courage and compassion and stubborn hope, Iris and Adrian understood that this imperfect, beautiful, hard-won happiness was worth every risk they'd taken to find it.